Welcome to day 2 of BOF Voices 2023. I'm Imran Amed, founder and CEO of the Business of Fashion. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you watching around the world on our global live stream from here in the beautiful English countryside. It's a crisp, cool, but clear morning. Just the perfect time to go inside the fashion system. Today, we're exploring the critical issues facing our industry in the year ahead with some of the industry's top designers, entrepreneurs, and business leaders. And whether you're joining our global live stream or here in the room with us, don't forget to share your feedback using the hashtag BOFVoices. This morning, more than 500,000 people received the State of Fashion 2024, our analytical forecast for the year ahead in partnership with McKinsey & Company, in your Daily Digest newsletter. If you haven't downloaded your copy as yet, you can find a link in the chat window next to the video player. Everyone here in Oxfordshire received their copies when they arrived yesterday. As always, we predict the 10 themes that will shape fashion in 2024 across 3 distinct buckets: the global economy, consumer shifts, and the fashion system. And to go a bit deeper into some of this year's themes, I'm pleased to invite Achim Berg, global leader of McKinsey's apparel, fashion, and luxury group, to talk to me about some of these themes. Achim, welcome back.
Good morning, Imran.
So this is the 8th year that Achim and I are doing this little dance. But Achim, as we look ahead to next year, it seems as uncertain, as unpredictable, as potentially rocky as ever. And it seems like every year we're saying uncertainty, uncertainty, uncertainty. How are you talking about the year ahead with the people that you're advising in the industry?
It's challenging. And as you say, I think we've all experienced a couple of bumpy years, lots of surprises, and it looks like it's not any different in the year to come. But that's obviously why you need to read the report, because we've given it a lot of thought. We were looking for some pockets of hope, but also tried to paint a realistic picture of what we're facing. And that is a relatively challenging environment. We've all seen how 23 have developed, which was stronger in the first half in most geographies. Got a bit of a cool down in the second half. We expect that tone will be the overall tone for the next year. But there is some areas, and that's why we always come up with our 10 trends, where we believe there is opportunity. There's always opportunity. We're in the end in the fashion industry.
So what are those bright spots as you look ahead to next year?
So there is, when we look at the first one on fragmented future, it's going to be challenging in Europe. It's going to be challenging in North America. China has not as quickly recovered as we had hoped 12 months ago, but there will be continuous growth on that end. There is India, which is a candidate. We've discussed that in previous reports.
Yes, we have.
We're still hopeful. And there's the Middle East. But also here you see that the geopolitical challenges we're facing could also impact that. But in general, there is lots of buying power, and there's opportunity in particular for luxury in the Middle East.
One thing that we have gone into depth in the report is the expected return of travel. Travel has been coming back. It feels very resilient. Next year, the prediction is travel will be 10% above pre-pandemic levels in 2019. How will that impact the way brands and leaders need to engage with customers?
We're going to see a bit of a recovery of the travel industry, also of the shopping that is related to travel. But we believe it's going to be different. It's not just pure consumerism. There is a clear shift from product to experience. We've also all recognized that the cost of travel have gone up. If you look into flights, into hotels, into any kind of experience. So budgets are moving. And we also see in particular in the lower price points that in order to afford travel, people cut back on clothing and fashion spending. Nevertheless, people are in the mood to do that, and that means there is opportunity for certain categories. There's also opportunity for different ways of distribution. Yeah, think about pop-up, think about stores in travel destinations to a bigger extent than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, that intersection between travel and shopping is really interesting. We also expect to continue to see a wave of regulation. And on this stage in previous years, we've talked about the roles that governments, that policy has to play in addressing fashion's contribution to the climate crisis. It feels like that's reached an inflection point and it's changing quickly.
Yeah, without any doubt. And I think we warned, in a way, we warned everybody last year because we said there's a risk of greenwashing. I think that risk, has become even bigger. In the EU alone, there's 16 pieces of regulation underway. The first ones are likely to hit in 2024. And I think we all need to recognize that after a phase of awareness, a phase of commitments, everybody committed something for 2030. We're now entering a phase of delivery. We need to walk the talk. And even if the macro environment is not helpful, even if a lot of players have to control their cost, the regulator will just not accept that. And you cannot switch it on just overnight. You need to take some time for preparation. And that's what will be a priority for the next year.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear Lena Nair, the new global CEO of Chanel, sit here yesterday and say that that was part of her kind of top agenda points as she thinks about the vision of Chanel. So the biggest change I've seen is like not just the awareness and the commitments, but actually that it's become a CEO agenda point.
There is no CEO strategy, there is no board meeting without sustainability high on the agenda. And the question, how are we moving on that one? Everybody wants it, everybody needs it.
Okay. Achim, thank you so much.
Good to see
As
you.
always.
Thanks.
All right. The last time I had the opportunity to sit down with Brunello Cucinelli was almost 10 years ago. I had the privilege of experiencing the curious, incredible world at his headquarters in Solomeo, Italy, the 14th century Perugian hamlet that he has lovingly restored over the past 3 decades. Now, this was long before COVID changed the way we all dress, before the so-called quiet luxury phenomenon took over the industry, and before the company that Mr. Cucinelli founded became the fastest growing publicly traded company in the luxury sector. When I visited Solomeo, I spent 2 hours picking Mr. Cucinelli's brain to understand his unique business philosophy. And I really returned to London feeling genuinely moved. I had never met a business leader like him before, someone with an understated but deeply ethical approach to business building, rooted in a philosophy that he calls humanist capitalism. So it was a real surprise to receive a letter from Mr. Cucinelli this summer with his thoughts about artificial intelligence. He wrote, "I imagine this new reality as similar to a breath that can revive the vital fire of our human mind." This year at Voices, I wanted to learn more from this man whom I deeply respect and who has set an example for an entire industry. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Brunello Cucinelli to the Voices show.
Chiara, scusate, ma il mio inglese non mi consente di parlarvi con l'anima.
I apologize, but my English is not good enough to allow me to speak.
Quindi, Chiara, perché io ho dedicato tempo a Platone, Aristotele, ho fatto molti corsi di inglese, ma non riesco ad avere quella terminologia per parlarvi con l'anima.
Those words that allow me to speak from my heart.
Lei è la mia anima
So
pensante.
I am the thinking soul of Brunello
Quando
in
è
English.
venuta ha detto,
When she turned up,
traduci, sì, ok.
I said, I'm a translator.
Traduci, eccellentissimo, onnipotente reggitore
almighty
dell'universo.
ruler of the
Così
universe.
dice
So
Sant'Agostino.
that's how St. Augustine puts
Lei ha
it.
tradotto.
And I translate it.
Mr. Cucinelli,
Brunello.
Brunello,
Bravo.
molto grazie per venire qui.
Anche perché domani usciamo con la collezione
Also
donna.
because the ladies collection is coming out
Quindi
tomorrow.
un po'
So
così.
we're slightly on edge, you know.
Un po' così.
I'm so grateful that you're here. When I came to Solomeo back in, I think it was 2014, we sat and we had this incredible conversation for 2 hours. And we spent a lot of time talking about your business philosophy, this idea that business doesn't only have to be about business. Can you tell me and share with us, where does this philosophy of yours come from?
Sì, guardate, io ho vissuto fino a 15 anni in campagna.
I lived in the countryside until I
Facevamo
was
i contadini
15 years
e ho
of age.
vissuto benissimo.
We were farmers and I led a great life there.
È stata la mia
And
università
it
della
was
vita.
my university of life, so to speak.
Poi quando siamo andati a abitare vicino alla
Then we
città,
actually moved close
mio
to the
babbo è andato
city,
a fare l'operaio.
and my dad took up a job as a
veniva
blue-collar worker,
umiliato,
and
offeso
he
al
was
lavoro.
demeaned and belittled at work
E i
all the
suoi occhi
time.
lucidi
And I saw tears
mi
in
hanno
his
educato
eyes,
ad
and
avere
that
una
was my
visione
source
diversa
of
del
inspiration to have a completely different vision of the world.
Io non ho studiato niente.
I'm not that educated, didn't
Perché ho
study
fatto 3
much,
anni di ingegneria
because
e un
I
esame.
actually was at engineering faculty for 3 years. I
Ho
sat
vissuto
one
10
single
anni
exam,
al bar del
and
paese.
I spent hanging out 10 years at the local
Non è che lavoravo al
cafe.
bar.
I was not working at the local cafe for 10 years. I was just
E
hanging
quella
out.
è una,
And
ma anche quella,
That
guardate, è un'altra
too, you
università della
see,
vita.
yet another university practice
Perché
of life.
incontravi sempre
Because you
qualcuno
would
che ascolta
always
le
come
tue
across
pene.
someone who was willing to listen to your sorrows.
Non c'è più tanta
And
gente
this does
disponibile ad ascoltare
no
il
longer
nostro
happen.
mal
There are not many
dell'anima.
people who are willing
che è
to
con noi ogni
listen
giorno.
to our malaise in our soul that we carry within
Un po' più
ourselves.
debole, un po'
Every
più
day,
forte,
sometimes it's
ma il
milder,
grande tema
sometimes it's
della vita è che
stronger.
dobbiamo provare a
But
curare il mal
in
dell'anima.
life, that's what we need to try and do, to treat the malaise that we all have in
Questi
our soul.
occhi lucidi del
So the
padre,
teary eyes of
ho
my
pensato,
father, that's when I thought,
io vorrei provare a
I
lavorare
want to
per la
try
dignità
and
morale ed
work in
economica
order to
dell'essere umano.
foster moral and economic dignity of the human
Guardate,
being.
questa è la verità.
This is the truth, you see.
Lavorare per 1.200 euro
Because
al
if you
mese,
go to work and only make 1,200 euros
in
a
un
month
luogo non molto
in a
carino, dove
place
non
that
puoi
is not
vedere il
very
cielo,
pleasant, where you can't actually look up and see the sky,
dove qualcuno non ti
where
considera.
maybe someone doesn't even
Io volevo
pay
fare
heed to you.
diversamente.
I wanted to do things differently.
Volevo che l'essere umano
I
lavorasse
wanted
in
my
bei luoghi,
human beings to be surrounded by pleasant
avesse un
places.
bel salario,
I wanted them to make,
che
handsome
fosse
money.
trattato come
And I
un'anima
wanted them
pensante.
to be treated like thinking souls.
Perché Jean-Jacques Rousseau
Because
dice
Jean-Jacques Rousseau
che un essere umano è
stated
creativo
that a human being can be
quando tutto
creative
intorno a
when
te è in
everything
equilibrio
around
con
them
il creato.
is in balance, in harmony with creation.
Se io ti faccio una coccola, una
So
carezza,
if
ti dico
I
come
am
stai?
kind to you, if I ask
Adriano
you, how are
Imperatore
you?
dice,
You see, Adrian,
non ho mai
the
conosciuto
emperor, said,
qualcuno
I have
che dopo
never
un
met
complimento
anyone
non
who
si sia sentito
did
migliore.
not feel better after being
Ecco,
paid a
questo è lo scopo
compliment.
della mia vita.
So this is the
Io
purpose
volevo e
of my
credevo e
life.
credo
I wanted, I believed, and
in
I
una
still
sorta di
believe
capitalismo
in a kind
contemporaneo.
of contemporary way
Siamo
of
quotati in borsa,
capitalism.
vogliamo
We
fare
are
profitti.
a listed company, we do
Però vogliamo
want
fare
to
i giusti
make a
profitti.
profit, but a fair profit at that.
Che c'è un equilibrio tra profitto
Because
e
there
dono.
should be a balance between profit
Questo
and giving
abbiamo
back.
dall'umanità
And
e questo dobbiamo
you see, this
ridonare.
is something that we have to
Il dono
give
è
back
qualcosa
to
che ti viene
mankind.
dall'anima, no?
Giving back really elevates your soul.
E forse si vive meglio.
And then you live better
Sapete
if you
quando
behave
Socrate
like
dice,
that. You know,
"Io non
Socrates
so che cosa ci sarà
stated,
dopo la morte."
I don't know what will happen after life,
Ma per i buoni sarà
but
diverso
for
che
the
per i
people who
malvagi.
have behaved, they will have lived better.
E così non fosse
Because if
vissuto
there's
meglio.
nothing there, after
Io
life, I
voglio
will have lived
vivere
better if I've lived
normalmente.
nicely. So I want to
Voglio
lead
fare
a
scherzi.
normal life. I want to play jokes
Perché
and
sono
pranks.
cresciuto con gli
Because
scherzi.
that's the way I was brought up, with jokes and pranks.
So, okay. I remember this story, and I was, as I said in my introduction, I was deeply moved by this story. But a lot has changed since then, Brunello. In the last time that we sat down, your company now does will do this year over 1 billion euros in turnover. It is the fastest growing publicly traded luxury company in the sector. It is attracting a lot of competition. So you have other players in this, what people are calling the quiet luxury space. Zegna, Loro Piana, all of these companies. How is it that you, with this, humanist capitalism approach, compete and perform so well in this very cutthroat, competitive sector?
Mio babbo che è morto l'anno scorso a 100 anni mi diceva.
So my father passed away last year. He was 100 and he kept saying to me, "Do you want to be the richest guy in the graveyard?"
Ricordati che i debiti si lavorano anche la
Also,
domenica.
he added, "Remember that debt works on Sundays too."
No, però io ho
And
investito.
you see,
Ho
I
investito moltissimo nell'essere
invested
umano.
heavily in the human being.
Ogni essere umano è
Every
creativo.
human being is creative.
Non è vero che ci sono
It
i
is
creativi
not
e gli
true
altri
that you
sono
have
normali.
the creative on the one side and
E
then
la
the others on the
creatività
other
viene
side.
dalla stima,
Because
dalla fiducia, dallo
creativity
sguardo.
is spawned and engendered by, regard, by the way you treat
questo.
people. That's the way it
Quindi è
is.
chiaro che io ho sempre
So,
creduto
of course,
in
I
un
have
gusto che mi
always
piaceva.
maintained and believed in a kind of taste that I
Noi
liked
eravamo
myself.
contadini.
So we were
Mia mamma mi ha
farmers,
regalato un paio di
peasants,
pantaloni
and my
verdi,
mom gave to me a pair of
velluto.
green corduroy trousers.
Li ho
green.
sotterrati
I
dietro
buried
casa,
them,
perché non mi
because
piace
I
il verde.
don't like green. So,
Che posso fare?
so what can I do? You see?
Avevo solo quelli.
And that's the only pair of
E mia
trousers
mamma
they
mi diceva,
were to
"Dove
last
sono
me
i
the
pantaloni
whole
verdi?" Non
season.
lo
And
so.
she kept asking me, where are the green trousers?
Adesso
disappeared.
ho comprato quella casa
And
lì.
now I bought back the very same house where I
Che
was
non me l'hanno
born,
toccata.
and it's been kept
Adesso voglio andare a
unchanged.
trovare i
And I
pantaloni
want to go there and dig them
Però
out.
vi dico
Dig
una-
them out.
Però vi dico una cosa,
But let me tell
guardate.
you one thing now.
Avevamo 100 ettari di
So
bosco.
we had 100 hectares of
Non
woods,
ci facevano tagliare
and
un
they
arbusto
wouldn't
per
let us fall
scaldarci.
one single twig just to warm
Noi
us
per
up.
scaldarci aprivamo la
And
botola
so
delle
instead, we
vacche e
would
veniva
open the
sul
trapdoor
caldo.
on the floor and we would receive
Ma
the warmth
dove
from
vuole
the animals
arrivare
in the
l'essere
stable.
umano?
You see, they were so cruel. I don't
Abbiamo
understand
bisogno di
that.
riequilibrare.
So that's why we need to
Questo è
redress
sicuro.
the balance, I'm sure.
E io credo che anche coloro
And
che
I think that
compreranno
even those
si
who will,
informano dove è fatto,
buy the
come è
shoppers, they
fatto,
want to know
ha
exactly
recato danni
where
al
a
creato,
specific item has
a
been
tutto.
made, how it's been
Ci
made,
vuole un
where the
nuovo
creation has
contratto
been
sociale
harmed.
con il creato,
Along the
guardate.
process, we need a new social
Sicuro.
contract with creation.
una
That's for
sostenibilità del
sure.
clima.
Because we have a climate-related
sostenibilità umana.
sustainability, a human
Quanto
sustainability,
guadagni al
which
lavoro?
means how much money do
In
you
che
make
luogo
at
lavori?
work?
C'è una
What kind of
sostenibilità
place
culturale,
surrounds you while you work? There's a cultural, spiritual sustainability.
tratto bene, tu
Because
stai
if I
meglio.
treat you well, then your spirit will be lifted.
Tecnologica.
And then technology-related
Quante ore sei
sustainability.
connesso?
How many hours do you have to be online for
tecnologia è un
me,
dono
for
del
business
creato,
reasons?
no?
Mind you, technology
Ma
is a
potrebbe anche
blessing
rubarci
from
l'anima che il
creation,
creato ci ha
but
dato.
sometimes it steals the
C'è
soul
una
that
sostenibilità
creation
morale.
bestowed upon us.
Io voglio
There's a
essere
moral
un'azienda
sustainability.
italiana.
I want to be
E
an
quando mi parlano
Italian
un
company.
po' meno bene dell'Italia
And
mi
when
arrabbio
they
un po'.
speak ill about Italy, I get offense. I don't like that.
So speaking of technology,
Mi piace molto.
I
vai.
love that. I love that.
I
Carry on.
received that letter from you this summer, and I was so surprised because, I don't think of, when I think of Brunello Cucinelli, the business, when I think of you and, the experience I had in Solomeo, technology is not the first thing that came to mind. And so when I got this essay on technology, on artificial intelligence from you, it actually had a surprising perspective buried in it. And you have a very nuanced view on the potential of this technology.
Sicuro. Intanto prima non dobbiamo aver paura di niente.
Well, first of all, we should not be scared,
Perché noi
really,
padri vi abbiamo
because
educato
we
all'obbligo di
fathers
aver paura.
have brought you up to be always afraid and
sostituite
scared
la
of
paura con la
something.
speranza.
Please replace the words
Sicuro.
fear with hope.
Questo ci
That's for
porterà
sure.
una marea di benefici.
And this way you will receive, it will be very beneficial
lavori
for you.
ripetitivi,
You see,
noiosi, che faranno-
through the AI, we will have the repetitive jobs being carried out by,
Ci aiuterà
not by
moltissimo.
the machine. And this will be a very helpful tool, I believe.
Ma non piange.
But it does not
Non si
show
emoziona.
any emotion, AI. It does not cry.
questo
It's
è il
never
grande
brought to
vantaggio
tears.
dell'uomo.
So this
Sarà
is
un
why
nostro partner.
human beings will gain from it, because AI will be
Sarà
just
la
a partner
verità.
for us.
il valore dell'uomo.
we will rediscover the
Se io
value
ti
of
faccio una
truth and
telefonata,
human beings.
come
If
stai?
I make a phone call to you, if
Sento la
I
tua
call you,
voce.
I can hear your voice on
Se
the
io ti
phone instead of
scrivo,
writing. If I write
vedi la mia
by
scrittura.
hand, then you can actually see
I
my
libri.
handwriting and know that it's me.
Come diceva
And
Adriano
also books.
Imperatore,
Hadrian the Emperor used to say,
stati la mia
books
prima patria.
were the first home for
La
me,
verità
home
splendida.
country. That's where truth
Noi
lies.
abbiamo proprio pubblicato
And
oggi
right
una lettera a
today,
tutti i
we
collaboratori.
sent out a letter to all
Ho
our
detto,
co-workers
voi
where
potete
I said,
lavorare con
well,
l'intelligenza
you can
artificiale.
definitely work using AI as
Ma
a
l'ultimo
tool,
voi scrivete.
but the very last line that you need to
Esempio.
write,
Ciao,
for example,
Brunello.
hi, goodbye,
Insieme
Brunello,
all'intelligenza
this text
artificiale.
has been written with the help of artificial
Ho
intelligence,
fatto
just to make
70 anni a
sure, to be
settembre, è
clear.
venuto questo amico
You see,
americano.
I turned 70 in September. There was this American friend who came to these celebrations.
Mi ha mandato
And then
un
afterwards, he
messaggino
sent a thank you message.
che secondo me gli era scritto
And
Dante,
I
Shakespeare.
it sounded like Dante or Shakespeare, the way it was worded.
Ho detto, ma chi te l'ha
And I said,
scritta?
but who wrote that?
L'intelligenza
Well,
artificiale. Ecco, no,
AI.
questo non va bene.
Well, no, this is no good.
Se tu
No.
lo fai con l'intelligenza
If you
artificiale, mi
actually
scrivi
do
insieme.
use AI, you have to specify
degli
it right at the
aggettivi.
end.
Solo
You see,
che
there are
Dante,
some
Shakespeare
adjectives. Only Dante or Shakespeare could come
possono
up with
scrivere.
something like that.
Quindi vuol dire che manca
So
di
it
umanità,
means that there
manca
is,
di verità.
there's a lack of humanity in that
Non
kind of
abbiate
writing.
paura.
So do not
Ci
be
aiuterà
afraid.
moltissimo.
It will be very helpful
poi ci
for
saranno
us.
due grandi temi.
And then there will be two
Andremo alla
important
ricerca di
things.
esseri umani
We
che
will be
pensano
in the lookout for
sempre di
thinking
più.
human beings. You are
E di esseri
thinking souls.
umani
And
che
also
hanno le
we will
mani
be seeking human beings with genius-like hands,
Puoi fare una
skilled
macchina
hands.
meravigliosa,
Because you can
ma
build
se
a
non conosci
wonderful
il carburatore,
machine, but unless you know
funziona.
the engine, the proper engine, how it
Quindi
works, and put your
non siate
hands in it,
spaventati.
it's never going to
A
work.
me mi diverte
So do
da
not be
morire.
afraid. I
Mi ha fatto
have
uno
fun with
scherzo.
it. I was played a wonderful joke.
Senta lei quando ha incontrato
You see, they
Steve
said,
Jobs.
listen, this is you talking when you met Steve Jobs.
Io gli ho fatto 400
And
t-shirt, ma non
you
l'ho mai
see, I
incontrato.
made 400 t-shirts for him, but I never met him in person.
E lui parlava, "Ciao, Brunello, come
And he was saying, Brunello, hi, how are you? And I thought,
Bello per un verso.
well, on the one
affascinante.
hand, very charming and
Ma
fascinating,
ricordatevi,
but you should
l'essere umano
remember
è
that
qualcosa di speciale.
human beings are
Ho detto
special, different.
a un mio amico,
And
"Se
I
tu farai
said
un robot,
to a friend of mine, if you ever build a
alzato gli
robot
occhi al cielo,
who, while looking up,
gli esce una
will
lacrima,
be brought to
allora
tears,
avrai fatto
that's
qualcosa.
when you will have discovered
Quindi è
and
un
made
bel
something
nostro
special.
partner.
So I would say it's a sidekick,
ci
it's a
aiuta.
partner, AI, helping
Quindi
us, it's a
noi siamo
tool.
apertissimi.
So we are very open to embrace
E mi
it.
diverte anche
And what
tutti quelli che sono spaventati.
you see, and I see so many people frightened.
che
Oh
deve
my God!
succedere?
And it, I
Che
find
deve
it really
succedere?
fun. What should happen? What should happen?
Questo mio amico
So I have this
telefona a un amico
friend.
per fissare un appuntamento.
So he was calling a friend just to set a time for
Ciao, facciamo
something.
l'appuntamento.
So shall we do it
Quello
at
gli
5?
risponde.
Then he got the reply.
Sai,
It was
col
a
messaggino,
message,
no?
all messages.
E lui gli
No,
risponde.
5:30, and then another reply. And this
4
and that.
minuti e mezzo
4.5
per stabilire
minutes just to
un
set
appuntamento
the
alle 5
time
del
for an
pomeriggio.
appointment at
Io ho
5
detto,
p.m.
"Scusa,
And I
tu
said,
lo chiami?
listen,
Ciao,
you
Giuseppe.
call him. Hi, Giuseppe.
vediamo il 5,
Shall we
ok.
meet at 5? Yes, 5:30.
Ho sentito
Done.
la voce.
I've heard his voice.
Ho sentito l'anima
I've heard his soul,
e ho dedicato
and
pochissimo tempo.
I only spent
Guardate,
a few
noi dobbiamo
seconds on
tornare
it. So,
a guardare il
look,
cielo
we
di stelle.
really have to go back to raising
Non le
our
guardiamo
gaze.
più.
We have
Io
stopped
spesso
doing that,
sto lì a
looking at the
Solomeo.
stars. Very often,
E la sera
I
guardo il
sit
cielo.
there at Solomeo and I look at the sky.
Che si dice, questo è diventato male.
And if you see me, you
No,
think
io
I'm
guardo il
crazy.
cielo.
No, I'm just looking at the sky.
Quando siamo in difficoltà,
Because
chiediamo
when
aiuto.
we are in trouble, what do? We always reach up. We always look up. And we have stopped doing that.
A marzo ho vinto un premio.
In March,
speciale.
I have been awarded quite a
Allora, il
special
giorno prima sono andato al
prize.
cimitero.
So I went to the cemetery
miei
the
parenti
day
lì,
before I
no?
went to be presented with it. And I have all
Nonno,
my
zio,
relatives there, my
domani vado a
uncle and
Parigi a
aunt. And I
ritirare un
said,
bel premio.
Uncle, I'm going to Paris tomorrow. I was speaking to the
Poi mi
dead.
sono emozionato.
And then I was moved, of course.
Sono tornato.
Then I
Con il
came
premio,
back
sono andato al
and
cimitero.
with the
Ecco il
prize,
premio.
brandishing it, here's the prize that I won. I said to all my
Grazie
dead
per tutto
relatives,
quello che avete
thank you for all that you gave
Siete
me.
riprendono col telefono.
Well, if somebody had made a movie of it, I would have, thought that I was crazy. So, truth be told, we need to go back to speaking to our friends, our dear ones, our partners. We need to really recover some sort of mankind, humanity. We should not judge or pass judgment on anybody. Spinoza said, I've not come to the world to judge or to condemn. I've come to the world to know, for knowledge. We are all different. Rousseau still said, I can't even conceive that there is one single human being that is similar to me. We are all different. So I want to be open to everything. I play jokes to anyone, even to my Japanese friend. That's another nice prank. So there was a huge clock right at the entrance of the building, and I basically changed the time 1 hour forward. And in the morning, you see, they said, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. In the morning, I went there, and everybody was looking at the watches. They were amazed and taken aback. It was such a great prank.
And
this was the owner of the Itochu, the president of the Itochu multi-brand store. I said, how did you come up with something like that? Because we have to meet life with a smile. Whoever wants to be happy, please do, because there is no certainty about tomorrow. Lawrence the Magnificent in 1460.
No certainty about tomorrow. The world that we live in is changing quickly. You mentioned just now in September that you celebrated your 70th birthday.
Che non sono pochi.
Happy birthday.
Well, it's not just a little thing,
Yeah.
Però se tu ti alleni,
but if you
non devi mangiare.
Well, you don't have to eat too much, and if you work out, you see, I am starving every day, all day, starving.
Okay,
constantly.
I want to ask this question though because we're going to run out of time. I'm thinking about the future. And as someone for the last 30 years who's built this company, how are you securing, in English we call it future-proofing? One day, you won't be able to lead the company anymore. Who will take over from you? What is your plan for the future?
No, ho già fatto.
It's done and dusted.
When
I was 57 years of age, I established an English kind of trust in favor of my daughters, irreversible trust. They are the beneficiaries. Now we have 2 CEOs running the company. I act as creative director. And I'm surrounded by this very young 40-year-old team that work with me. And so there is the future planned for the coming centuries.
And you're a publicly traded company. And you're a fast-growing company. And I'm sure the people at Kering and the people at LVMH and the people at Richemont are like, we want that. Would you ever consider selling your company with this humanist capitalism philosophy to a bigger player?
Io vivo in un paese.
Well, I live in a village,
Mangio
you see.
3 volte al giorno,
I
dovrei
have
mangiare 3
lunch,
volte al giorno.
well, I should eat 3 times a day, but actually I
Pensare.
don't, because in the evening I just
Ma di
lose
che
weight.
ho
I don't. What more do I need? I don't need anything more. I had no money in my pocket when I was a peasant, and I was happy with life. 10, I was happy when I was at university, always happy. Now I am a rich man, a wealthy man, but my life has not changed a bit. So I would like my company, my business to still be there for the coming 100, 200 years. And I would like whoever runs it to keep believing in a contemporary capitalism, to make a fair profit whilst respecting human beings and creation. Look, this thing of working as a laborer, a blue-collar worker, this is yet another important issue, because we would always like other people's children to become blue-collar workers, not our children. And you wake up in the morning, you are a laborer, and you go to work for $1,200 a month. No, that's what I wanted to change.
Gli operai impiegati da noi sono uguali.
You see, in our company, blue-collar workers or white-collar workers, exactly the same, equal. And everybody has windows. You can look out. If you have a chance to look out whilst you work, you are more creative. And look, you just need to devote an earmark 1% of your profitability and give it to your blue-collar workers. That's a game changer for them.
An example for the whole industry. Thank you, Mr. Cucinelli.
Grazie, io sono onorato che siete.
Thank you, I'm very
Non posso
honored.
ascoltarvi tutto il giorno, starei qui.
I'm sorry I cannot
Farei anche
possibly
qualche
stay here the
scherzo.
whole day. I would stay here, I would be very happy to
domani
play
esce la
pranks you
collezione.
too, but the collection is
E
coming
come
out
mia
tomorrow.
abitudine,
And as
stasera vado
usual,
davanti alla
you
chiesa.
see what I do, I just go
Ho
in
San
front
Francesco e San
of the
Benedetto.
church. In the evening I have my
Oh,
Saint
dico, ragazzi,
Francis,
datemi una
Saint
mano,
Benedict
perché
said, please reach out to me
noi
this
possiamo
time,
restaurare
because
chiese,
we can
monasteri,
restore all
teatri.
the churches, all the theaters
Però
and
una
the
mano
monasteries,
datemela.
but you have to reach out to us
È un modo
sometimes.
per parlare con
It's
te
a
stesso.
way to talk to
Sono
yourself,
onorato,
obviously.
grazie.
I'm very honored.
Che il
Thank
creato
you.
protegga.
May creation
Auguri
protect
di
you.
buon Natale.
Best wishes for the
Ma che
festive
questo
season.
periodo
But
fosse
may
il
this
periodo
festive
dell'anima.
season be the time
Abbiamo
for your
bisogno.
soul. We need that.
Grazie. Grazie.
What a guy. You can see why I spent 2 hours with him, right? Our decisions within the fashion industry resonate far beyond our immediate surroundings. And as we detailed in the State of Fashion 2024 report, the industry can no longer put off efforts to abate emissions and strengthen supply chains. While mainstream conversations about fashion's climate impact are often led by organizations in the West, it's the global South that often bears the brunt of consumption and climate catastrophes, as recent deadly monsoons and floods in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh make all too clear. So in our next session, we're going to dive into climate colonialism. At the top of the agenda is the issue of loss and damage, or how much rich countries who are most responsible for causing climate change should support poorer countries who are most vulnerable to its impacts. That's something that fashion still needs to grapple with, and at a critical pain point in efforts to turn the industry's ambitions to operate more sustainably into reality. Here to explore this topic further is Sammy Oteng, the Senior Community Engagement Manager at the OR Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Ghana pushing for circular textiles. Ayesha Barenblat, who is the founder of Remake, a San Francisco-based nonprofit dedicated to eradicating harmful practices in the fashion industry. And Vidhura Ralapanawe, Executive Vice President for Innovation and Sustainability at global apparel manufacturer Epic Group in Sri Lanka. And leading this conversation is our resident expert, BOF's Chief Sustainability Correspondent, Sarah Kent. Please join me in welcoming them all to the Voices stage.
Thank you, Imran. I'm going to confess that we have been talking since yesterday evening about what we want to say in this panel. So we're going to try and press it to 20 minutes, but there's so much to unpack here. So I hope it's just a jumping off point for further conversations here in the room at Voices and for everyone watching as well. I want to start, though, Ayesha, by going to you and asking you just to unpack a little bit what we mean by climate colonialism in a fashion context.
It's a lot of jargon, isn't it? So let's just make it very simple. The fashion industry, by conservative estimates, is somewhere between 3 and 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We're up there. It's a problem. And by 2030, we're estimating that we will lose upwards of 65 billion in losses if we don't get our arms around the wicked problem that is the climate crisis. So it makes complete business sense that we have to tackle the climate crisis. But the industry is structured in a way that's very colonial. Think about this business of fashion, a McKinsey report, right? The companies that are the most profitable are headquartered in the places where they have historically created the most amount of carbon emissions: the United Kingdom, the United States, the European Union. And so those are the countries that are not only top historically from a carbon emission standpoint, but they're also the ones that extract most of the value and profitability in the industry. Here we are, the people on this panel, from production countries, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the countries where we grapple with the waste streams of fashion, like Ghana. And these are countries historically that have been very low when it comes to carbon emissions. And yet this industry is built on the backs of black and brown bodies. So that's really where the colonial structure is what we mean by it. It's the rich countries that are reaping all the rewards and benefits, and it's the poor countries that have kept this industry profitable. And so the climate conversation today is very much mimicking that colonial structure, where the companies headquartered that are essentially glorified marketeers are telling production nations how to deal with the climate crisis. They're setting science-based targets, but they're not paying for it. And the communities that we serve, the women in places like Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, where the climate crisis is already here, it's not something distant and far away, are not seeing any of the financial resources and support to help us grapple with the climate crisis. And so that's really what we mean by waste colonialism. It's let's flip the script and actually have a conversation around the people who create value for this industry and how do we center her in the conversation.
And I think it's an interesting moment in time to be having this conversation too, because tomorrow the UN's COP Climate Summit starts. This issue of funding for poorer countries that have been less responsible for climate change but are now bearing the brunt of it very much on the agenda. But this conversation has not started happening to the same degree within the fashion industry yet. But I think we will start to see it happening more. And Ayesha, you laid out very clearly how this is happening at a production level. But Sammy, you're sitting in Ghana. You work with one of the world's largest markets for secondhand clothes. What's happening to all of this stuff once it's been bought, used, and discarded? What's the situation you're seeing?
Yeah, so I'm from Ghana, and that's where Kantamanto is. Kantamanto is the largest reuse and second-hand market in the world. It has around 30,000 people working. These are registered people, so there are even more people working in the market. But, the market sees around 50 million garments coming in from the global north into the global south, like into Kantamanto specifically, every week. And just for statistics, Ghana is only a country of around 32 million people. So imagine every week Ghana has to see 50 million garments being shipped in from this side of the world into the country just so we are the ones to manage these wastes. So the garments come in, and on average, 40% of these garments go into waste. Because the issue is now there isn't any quality garments being made in the terms of fast fashion. It's very low quality. So by the time it moves here to Ghana, it's already waste, and there's very little that can be done with it. And what happens is that because of the cultural fabric and the sentimental value of clothing, and then the culture of reuse and recycling that exists in Ghana already, people readily find ways to reuse these garments. For example, the jacket that I'm wearing today is, an example of the value that has been added to the waste that came from here by people in Ghana. Thank you very much. In Ghana. But what happens is that, if there's an influx coming in, the people have to now work at the pace of fast fashion. They can't work because there's value to it. They can't work because that's their culture. They're working because there's so much coming in, and they have to bear the brunt of this. And there's also, within the community, girls as young as 9 years old who have to bear, carrying 55 kg bills throughout the market, oftentimes leading them into fatal places, some of them dying whilst they're doing the work. But what happens is that there is no retail utopia. So no matter how much Ghana works or Kantamanto works to add value to these garments, 40% of these garments also end up going to places that they shouldn't be. So if you go to beaches, now beaches in Accra have turned to clothing soups. For example, this is a bag of clothing tags that were collected in just less than an hour of cleaning a small stretch of beach, no bigger than the space that we are in now. And this bag contains almost 1,000 tags. And some of these tags were even, devalued that we can't even add them here. But this is what we collected in less than an hour. So if you think about, what is happening in Ghana, and then the fact that most of these brands are even in deniability about what is happening in Ghana, it's very sad. Because if you think about it, we've engaged with so many people. Tony talked to them about this. It's been years of conversations around what is happening. But there is a lack of responsibility. Most brands are not talking. Because the thing is, even if we cease making clothing now, what happens to the years, the decades of damage that has been done to our environment?
And I think what's interesting here is that essentially what's been done is the problem across the board is being outsourced. So you've outsourced the production and the impact, and you've outsourced managing the waste. And Vidhura, I want to bring you in here because you're sitting within a manufacturer. You're being asked now to deal with these issues. Brands who have set targets saying they're going to cut their emissions are coming to you and saying, hey, you know where our emissions there are? They're in our suppliers, so please can you cut these emissions? But what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So bit of a background. Before I entered the fashion industry, I was a climate researcher. And I joined the fashion industry in 2006. And the work from a manufacturing side I started on climate is 2007. So, quite a long time before the industry really put sustainability into the boardroom. But throughout that period, what we have seen as the structural problem, which is the colonial problem, has not changed. And what do I mean by that? Yes, it's true. The brands decide what targets that we as manufacturers should do. And if we don't have agency to set our own targets, how do you expect us to deliver on them?
Right.
So that's the starting point. If you think of this, when we talk about emissions, we talk about historical emissions. The countries that manufacture garments are probably the most climate vulnerable countries in the whole world. And these are people who never contributed to the problem.
Right.
Now, what we've done is that if you think about a value, so I'll give a good example. Let's talk about a completely linear value chain. $100 million company, 8% profit, say $8 million profits a year, $1 million. Tier 1 supplier, $450,000. Tier 2 supplier, $300,000. Okay, that will be like the value chain.
Just to clarify for not everyone who spends all their time looking at this, tier 2 being sort of
tier 2 is
material processing.
Tier 2 is the mill that makes the fabric. Tier 1 is the one that makes the garments. So the biggest emissions is actually where the fabrics are. So the company who makes the least amount of money from top line and bottom line has to spend the most amount of money, because the way we have distributed this responsibility is again coming from that colonial architecture. We tell you how much to deliver, you figure out how to do that.
And we won't pay for it.
So, and that's the interesting question, because if you think about apparel supply chains, it's a very unique construction. You don't have this type of supply chains in the, say, for example, food industry, because this supply chain has three very interesting characteristics. Disposability, because you want to decide, today I'm not buying anything from you, I'm going to buy from you. And this disposability is not just at company level, it's at country level. Number two is deniability, because anything that happens in supply chain, we need to say, it's not us. We have a very bad manufacturer in our supply chain. We've completely discontinued. And third one is cost. So we are looking at a supply chain that is designed, and we co-created it. It's just not just the brands. It's brands, it's the media, it's the manufacturers. We co-created a system that is useful for get very, very cheap garments into the market. Now we are trying to address a huge climate issue, sitting in the same business model, trying to keep same business relationships intact. And this is not going to work.
Not going to work. It isn't working.
Right? So we have, as we discussed earlier, 2030 targets are coming. Okay? Within now and 2030, that's just 6 years. Within that 6 years, there's quite likely 2 business downturns that will happen. So the actual time to do climate action is possibly 3 years. And we haven't even started. There is no way that any brand or any manufacturer, hardly any manufacturer, will hit their 2030 targets now.
I just want to repeat that because it's important. We were saying there is no way any brand or manufacturer is going to hit 2030 targets that global nations have agreed are critical in order to stave off catastrophic climate crisis. I just want that to sink in.
So there'll be few manufacturers do it, but as manufacturing fraternity, we will not do it.
So I want to step back a little bit and ask, what levers are there for change? You know, Achim started this and said, you know, regulation is coming and sustainability is on the agenda of every boardroom right now. You know, Ayesha, how are you seeing that filter through? What are you thinking about the impact of regulation? Do you think that is what is going to drive change?
Yeah. I mean, I think we first have to really just humanize the issue for all of you, right? We're talking about 70 million, mostly women of color in the production nations, the communities that we serve, for who the climate crisis is here now. And so what does that actually look like? Factories are very hot to begin with, if you've ever been in a factory, and we've had record temperature heat, which means that there's more fainting, heat exhaustion. It's not a productive workforce, but you know, your life doesn't just end in the factory. It's also, if it's very hot at home, instances of domestic violence go up. And so this is the reality that you're dealing with. Then let's talk about episodic flooding, right? When 2/3 of my home country in Pakistan was underwater, what workers are saying is, well, we don't have the infrastructure to get to the factories, and if the factories are closed, we're not going to get paid. And by the way, for the last 20 years, we've already been making poverty wages, and we don't have the safety nets to be caught. And so fundamentally, one of the things from a solution standpoint that we have to talk about is climate adaptation, not just mitigation. Every brand and retailer wants to talk about mitigation because they want to make money off the climate crisis. But our worker communities need climate adaptation resources. And by the way, not philanthropy. What we want is sort of equitable ways to make these communities whole. So that's one. I'd say the second is, you know, I read this report, and I'm very sorry to say, you know, in terms of the climate crisis, when McKinsey talks about for the fashion brands to join the Sustainable Apparel Coalition or to join the Fashion Charter, we have 30 years of experience knowing that voluntary multi-stakeholder initiatives where brands pay into the conversation and then set voluntary goalposts don't work. For 30 years, we have said we're going to make living wages a reality in this industry, and it's not happened. We can no longer just talk. What we need is enforceable binding agreements. We know what works. But to do that, we can't just sit around and have conversations anymore. And so not all regulations are the same. And going back to the colonial constructs, a lot of the regulation is coming from the European Union and the United States without actually sitting down with the communities that have the solutions, talking to the manufacturers, talking to the workers.
I want to get Sammy's perspective here because I know you've spent a lot of time in France where they've been updating legislation to make brands responsible for the waste generated by the clothes they make. And you've been talking to regulators there to try and explain the situation in Ghana. You know, what has that been like? Are you seeing your experiences represented in policies that are being made at an EU level that are dictating the shape of the industry?
Yeah, I think for a very long time now, what has happened between, you know, with conversations like this around building policies and regulations is that the conversations are so isolated. There's no access to these conversations. As Vidhura mentioned earlier, the people bearing the brunt of all of these challenges are people back in my hometown, people in Pakistan, people in India, people in the global south. We are the ones bearing the brunt. So if there are conversations happening and they are happening at high levels and then the people who are suffering, living the realities of these challenges are not part of the conversation, then we are not going anywhere. And I think, you know, one thing that has happened with the conversation that we have in France so far is, you know, people, because they are so isolated, they don't even see what is going on. And I mean, you can show visuals and media and all of it, but if you live in a space where, you know, the reality is not around you, you only look at the video, you feel sad, and then move on. You don't, like, you know, you move on to your life and then forget about what you just saw. And I think it has been, you know, a hard conversation trying to get people to understand, because if you don't know it, then you don't know it. And that is what it has been. And another thing is, you know, what you're calling for within EPR, which is the Standard Producer Responsibility, is, you know, making it's globally accountable. Because if you're building these policies and they are just in such a way that the spaces where this clothing are coming from is what is benefiting, then it's already flawed. Mm-hmm. That's where the changes should come in. And then one of the things that we're also talking about is, like, you know, being able to publicize production volumes, because we talk about these challenges around fashion and fashion waste, but the truth is we don't even know how much we are producing in terms of fashion. We say it's 100 billion to 150 billion. That's a 50 billion gap.
Right.
Who is there? So if we are not able to find this, and then these are things that all brands have access to. It's difficult to calculate your carbon footprint, but it's very easy to count your garments. 1, 2, 3 is very easy arithmetic that everybody can do. So why is it that we are not making this public? Until we understand the problem that we have, we can't even move on to having conversations around solutions. And another thing is, talking about access. I'm pretty sure that, the VOF team has been so supportive, trying to support me getting our visas here. But the documents that I had to submit to get a visa to be here was about this thick. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Vidhura knows.
Was about this thick. So if it takes this lot of work jumping through hoops to even be part of the conversation, that in itself is colonialism. That in itself is a problem.
And we have to speak English.
Exactly.
To be here.
Yeah. Exactly. So all of these things are things that needs to be discussed before we go into the broader conversation around how to look around solutions towards these policies. Until we do these things, we keep around running in circles, and we can't keep having conversations forever. It has to get to a time where we are moving to actions and not just having conversations.
And I think it's important to remember this year, as Imran was saying, you see the crisis. It is here, the climate crisis is here. We are in a record year for temperatures. This is not a problem for the future. And I'm going to go back to you, Vidhura, to have the last word because we're running out of time. You said earlier that we're trying to fix this within a model that is fundamentally broken. We are trying to fix this in a structure that almost we cannot fix it within. What is a structure that would work better?
Okay, but let me also go back to one simple piece. What is the problem?
Minute, though.
What is the problem we are trying to solve? This year we will hit 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial in terms of temperature. So that was what we were trying to sort out in 2030. So all the climate targets and Paris Agreement that we've spoken about it's not valid as a target anymore. That just means that that we haven't just started. That just means that we need to start and move faster. But the piece that I want to talk about is that we cannot be separated as brands, manufacturers, mills to solve the problem. We have to recognize that this is a collective value chain. I don't want anybody to talk about supply chain emissions. We need to talk about value chain emissions. And I don't want anybody to talk about you're a manufacturer, you sort out your emissions. We as a collective must sort out our emissions. And what that means is that not distributing within ourselves saying that you have to put this much money, you have to put this much money. We have to collectively fund decarbonization.
Right.
Final point is that how did a conversation around climate change or climate crisis became a conversation only about decarbonization? Mm-hmm. We as industry are the ones who say so much about how much we care about the apparel workers. These are the people who are going to get flooded. These are the people who will have heat exhaustion in the factories. Why is that not part of the conversation? And why is equity, just transition, and repaying the climate debt by the global north about the historical emissions outside the purview of our climate conversations? So long as we package our climate conversation into a place that is convenient to us to talk about and not look at real problems, real people of people like who Sammy is representing, who Ayesha is representing, who I'm representing, we will not solve any problem. We will just talk about it and have glorified marketing campaigns only. And my only request is that this has to stop now. And that we need to create a new path. We need to relook at our supply chain relationships. We need to talk about value chain emission reduction. And we need to define what collective action is. And it's not only about sharing money. It's about sharing resources, but sharing spaces to talk about like this.
Well, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.
That was incredibly powerful. Thank you. I have a little housekeeping note. We have a full house today. We have some people waiting on the sides. If you have an empty seat next to you, can you shift towards the middle so everybody who's waiting on the wings can have a seat? We want to fill up all the chairs in the middle. Thank you. I love it when the amphitheater is full. Thank you for doing that. So sustainability, as you can see, is front of mind for the industry. And earlier, Achim and I were talking about the onslaught of new sustainability regulation coming for the fashion industry. In late August, the European Commission announced a new set of regulations that will require goods, including fashion, to be fitted with unique digital product passports as early as 2026. This was a topic we've covered in a previous State of Fashion report. And the move is a part of a broader push to accelerate sustainability efforts across the European continent. Not only will customers be able to authenticate products using their digital passports, they'll be able to transfer ownership and access services from resale and repair. So here to give us a little demo of how this technology works is longtime BOF Voices community member Pierre-Nicolas Hurstel, who's the co-founder and CEO of Ariane, a BOF Voices 2023 partner.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Okay, good. Okay. So I have a good news for you. This is probably the only conference you will hear this year that is about an intelligence that is not artificial. Okay? We're going to talk about ownership intelligence. On this very stage, we've learned about the damages of user personal data exploitation by big tech and social media. The incentive of social media is the race for engagement, as we've heard yesterday. But what about the business model? Selling user data to advertisers to sell more product. And even though we've learned about the urgent need for circularity and about the incredible potential of secondhand, yet not much has changed. We still pay big tech to reach more people to sell more new product. So let's dive into the future of how user-owned data and how digital product passports can contribute to solve some of these challenges. So first is the circularity challenges. We only use today 20% of the garment we own. And yet, 100% of brands' revenues, growth, and profits come from new products sold. So how can we imagine that this industry can truly become circular if that doesn't change? Until a significant part of brands' revenue comes from secondhand, there's no possible change. The second challenge is the client data control. Obviously, collecting data is great, but any piece of data expensively collected is immediately obsolete, it is natively static, so hard to secure and protect against leaks. People don't care about sharing their lives on social or with ChatGPT, but they're less willing to leave their data everywhere because it's just inconvenient. So the risk is to see first-party data disappear behind social logins and hide my email and other seamless features that will reinforce the need for third-party data. And because third-party data is less and less efficient, and it is expensive, and the regulator is going after it, and cookies are gone, and the side effects, obviously, of data centralization by big tech has proven to be disastrous for the wider world. So that brings me to the third challenge, compliance. We've heard about it a lot today. GDPR for data, AGEC in France, Eco-design soon, introducing digital product passports, green claim. At the end of the day, all of that is going to force brands to attach a persistent data to every single object they sell in the EU, with the goal to push users to choose better, to push brands to produce better, but also mainly to push to reuse and resell and recycle. So before exploring how these challenges can be tackled with digital product passport, Imran asked me to show you what is a digital product passport, how is that going to work? So I took the example of the newly released Mugler bag to show you a little video and explain how that works. Okay, so we see it. So a digital product passport is a persistent data about a product, accessible through a page, a piece of data where you can, an interface, where users, regulators, resellers will be able to learn everything about the product at any moment of the life cycle. How it's been made, produced, content that will have to be carefully curated, on top of what will be mandatory, to offer a meaningful experience, really about people, something about what people will care. A digital product passport is also a new touch point, okay, to engage users in a contextualized way, valuable way, around services and utility built on top of the product experience. And where it becomes interesting is that where ownership intelligence comes in, is the possibility when someone buys the product and owns the product to collect this passport, to collect a piece of data related to the product that is controlled by the user. So you can do that in a new kind of a client account, embedding the possibilities of tokenization. That is now more than about just purchases. It's about what you own, about new services, the possibility to resell easily, content and communications that are perfectly curated, new features, the possibility to record events in the history of ownership and to share this history of ownership, access all the time all the information about the product, add services like lost and found, etc. So, and obviously at the end of the day, a very easy way to resell and transfer the product. And I'll come back to that just after. So let's look at the architecture that is going to be needed to actually implement this digital passport, because all brands will have to do it by 2026. First of all, you need connected components on every single object. So connected components that can be scannable. So there are just two that work with everything, QR codes and NFC chips. And believe me, just the fact to add a QR code and an NFC chip to every single product in the supply chain, and it's not easy, okay? It takes time. This QR code will have to be linked to a persistent interface showing data about the product, and that can last forever, at least as long as the product lasts, okay? So that's number one thing. This data needs to come from somewhere. It needs to come from a new brand-owned data place, structured database where you gather content, you make calculations, you're able to check if the data is good for this compliance in this zone, because EU is going to ask you for some regulation, but then anytime soon California and Japan will do the same, and that will not be exactly the same. And then there's this opportunity to add on top a new kind of data, a customer-owned data about ownership that is neither centralized by the brand nor by any kind of third party that would want to make any business on top of it. So the infrastructure is built like that. First, you gather data in new kind of product-centric databases. Then you create new product-based experiences and interfaces with scannable elements and persistent interfaces. And last, you can add the possibility of ownership intelligence by empowering users with the data they control about what they own. So you go from collecting to being compliant and offering the possibility to read to truly offering value. So how can that solve the challenges that I raised at the beginning? Circularity. Okay. Many second-hand purchases are the first step into a brand for a user. The first product I buy for young generations might be a second-hand product. So some of your clients, you don't know them, you still target them on socials, but they are owners of the products that you own. So distributing pieces of data that people can circulate and transfer is a way to be connected to people that are part of the community, that are already consumers, even though they haven't bought anything firsthand. So this will have necessarily an impact on cost of acquisition and the money we spend paying socials and big tech to reach people and reach them again. And then, in a world where every product will come with a digital passport, the possibility to one day add royalties on products, the day it's so easy and the entire infrastructure of secondhand is profitable, it's fluid, it's easy for everyone, for users, for secondhand marketplaces, then there can be a new deal. If all the services are here and it's easy, maybe there's a possibility to add royalties, which would mean tomorrow revenues coming from something else than selling something new and something newly produced. Client data control. This new user data infrastructure based on ownership is also a huge opportunity to regain sovereignty over data. For once, to have a data that you don't have to protect, that you don't have to pay for, that is natively dynamic, that is issued by brand, that is owned by users. So if you look at how this architecture is, because it's going to cost, it's going to be long, and it's going to take time to be implemented. You look at this BCG study on DPP, and you see that the value for brands over time will come from the possibility to deploy this new data infrastructure and to create new revenue streams based on ownership. So the CRM of tomorrow, basically the way you interact with your users, is completely different from today. You have the first-party data, the things you know and you collect, static and non-dynamic. And then on top, you have user-owned data. User-owned data that you can read. It's not because it's in the hand of users that you don't have access to it. Obviously, the user has the choice. They always have the choice. They have the choice to show or not show. They have the choice to get rid of the asset, move it out, and not be recognized as the owner of it. So it's new possibilities to understand, new insights, but also new segmentations possibilities. The client account of tomorrow is completely different. Today, it's all about purchase and returns. Tomorrow, it's about what I own, maybe what I gifted, specific services that are allowing me to easily resell, repair, recycle, insure, to have specific recommendations, maybe specific targeted communications around exactly what I own. So, I missed one. So, this is going to take time, definitely. With AGEC coming up, DPP, regulation, the end of cookies, all of that is taking you to 2026. And it's pretty much the time it takes to test, prototype, understand all of that, find the new set of technology partners that will help you do that. And it's not science fiction, with millions and millions of products come with digital product passports today. My Nike shoes have a digital asset coming to it. This T-shirt has a digital asset, an NFC chip. I can even give you a digital asset as a proof that we met. My Panerai watch has a digital product passport. So all of that is coming up, even though it's still a little bit below the surface. But it's time to really look into that, and not with the thinking that it is just going to be a constraint and we just have to comply, but with the idea that we can truly change the revenue model and the cost model to have a positive impact on business and on companies while changing the way we do fashion. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Matthieu Blazy, has something you might call incredible fashion pedigree. After graduating from the prestigious Belgian fashion school La Cambre, he worked with Raf Simons on his namesake fashion brand. Then, Matthieu moved to Maison Martin Margiela, where he was famously outed by Suzy Menkes as the company's secretive head designer. In 2014, Matthieu moved to Céline, where he worked with Phoebe Philo, before joining forces with Raf Simons again at Calvin Klein from 2016 to 2019. In 2021, Matthieu finally got the top job. He was appointed creative director of Bottega Veneta, and he has not looked back since. Last night at dinner, he told me he was the kind of person who always liked to be behind the scenes. Well, I'm really glad he's with us here today, because His Autumn-Winter 2023 collection, shown at Milan Fashion Week in February of this year, was selected by BOF's editors as the best fashion show of the entire season. And we were talking a little bit about last night because there's so few fashion shows that make you feel emotion now. There's a lot of spectacle, but there's not that much emotion. And I just want to share a little video of a video I took on my phone from that show, and you can just like feel the music. So let's have a quick look at this. So after we saw that show, I knew that we had to have Matthieu speak at this year's Voices to share his amazing creativity with us. Gladly, he said yes. He's here to talk craft, the creative process, and how he and his team work with artisans to make the impossible possible. Please welcome Matthieu Blazy, together with BOF's editor-at-large, Tim Blanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't get a cuddle. Matthieu, you just told me you really like that show.
Yes.
Why?
The idea at the beginning was very strange. I said to the team, instead of doing 3-4 ideas and repeat them over the show, we're going to make a collection where we have 80 looks with 80 different stories. And the idea was to actually not edit at all, but to add. And the idea was a kind of a carnival, or something where a lot of people come from different horizons and they go in the same direction. And I don't know, I like that show because everything came together. It was very risky when we were doing the lineup, and you would have one dress that looked the opposite of the other one. There was no color card, everything was a color card. And then there was the samba and then music of the world, and I don't know, it felt very joyful.
Is it kind of counterintuitive for you to add rather than take away?
Yes. I'm not very good at editing in general. I like to explore more and more and more. It's funny, when I spoke to Mr. Pino, when he gave me the key of the house Bottega, I really wanted to add something, not to the fashion system, but maybe to do things in my own way. And it's true that, when you add a lot of characters, you add also layers and stories and also some emotions. You can dig into other characters and
I think it's very interesting when you look at these collections that you do at Bottega, how personal they are.
Yes.
I think it's quite an intriguing challenge for a designer to make a collection for a house like Bottega, which comes with an awful lot of expectation, to inject yourself into it, like details of what's in your closet from high school.
Yes.
And what your sister was wearing when she was a little girl.
Yes.
How you managed to incorporate this into such a sophisticated and complex fashion offering.
Yes. It's I went home last year to my parents, and then I opened the closet where you have all the kids wear. And then I was looking at those clothes, and I thought they were very interesting because they were produced in a time where we were producing less. Somehow they were better made. But also because they were supposed to last longer, they were also full of details. The labels were very interesting, the colors, the way it was stitched. I don't know. There was something that was very interesting in the making itself. And then, of course, those clothes, they have stories that was personal, or to my brother or my sister. And it's true that at Bottega, it's not that we want to produce less. We want for the clothes to last longer. And I think it was interesting to combine both, which is looking at the way garments were produced back in the days, but also the idea that things can come with a story. So, you know, I hope that if someone purchases, I don't know, a shirt, a bag, whatever it is at Bottega, that there is also the idea that you can also give it to someone else and that you can create a story with that piece. About personnel, it's true, the way I work with the team is quite emotional, so it's, you know, I challenge myself, the team also come with a lot of ideas and they challenge me. But at the end of the day, I try to also be very sincere in what we propose. And in that matter, if it doesn't touch me, I'd rather not put it in the show. Voilà. I want to have a connection with what we propose.
Now, I feel that the stories that you're telling with Bottega Veneta are very much the antithesis of what we've been hearing, what we will be hearing later on. You know, the rise of technology in fashion and the importance of technology. The emphasis at Bottega is on craft and is on the hand.
Yes.
And, you know, this talk is called Fashion Alchemy because it really is, I think the most powerful thing about fashion for me is that it is contemporary alchemy, that it takes base materials and turns it into what the alchemists, you know, the gold, the idea of gold. And it does that through craft. Mm-hmm. So, and craft has always been critical to you. I think of the things you did for Maison Margiela when you worked there, that was still some of the most exquisitely strange, hybrid clothing I have ever seen. I mean, kind of haunts me in my dreams. It looks like, yeah, do that again. We talked about Frankenstein.
Yes.
And here's Frankenstein in fashion, in a way, using craft to transform things. Sometimes it's ugly, and sometimes it's gloriously beautiful.
Yes.
So the importance of craft for you.
It's something, I mean, I've always been interested in craft in general, even before I knew fashion exists, you know, the idea of making, you know, stuff in the woods with your brother and sister, just the idea of making with your hands. When I arrived at Margiela, I took my office out of the studio and I put it inside the atelier. And it was nice because it was not just me thinking, you know, on my own and then give it back to the people that were making. We were actually making together. Another thing that I like a lot at Margiela was the idea of juxtaposition. So you have an idea, it's an idea that everyone knows. You have two ideas, you juxtapose them, you create something new. About technology, it's something that, you know, I'm from the generation where we used to see everything produced by Nike and everything is glued, and you know, we have this constant obsession of like what's new, what technology is going to bring on the table. And I got a little bit bored of this way of thinking. It's not because it's produced by a machine that it looks new. So at Bottega, who has a wonderful history of craft, I basically went back to the roots of making. When you make something by hand, it will always have a little mistake, which is not a mistake, which is part of the process. For example, there is one bag, we do it, and then another artisan do it, they will never look the same. So in 99% of the company, this would be a discarded product. At Bottega, I want to celebrate this. So when you go to the store, you won't find twice the same product. So you have the idea of a series, of course, but it's never the same. One artisan cannot finish the work of another artisan.
And can something handmade then represent, you mentioned new and the sort of tyranny of the new, But can something handmade represent something new just because it is always different?
Of course. The thing of craft, it's a debate we have a lot with the team, but also with the artisans. It's a timeless technology. And I like the idea that sometimes we need to use technology to support the craft, but it cannot come all from the machine, especially at Bottega Veneta. I would work for Nike, I would have a completely different approach, or maybe but in the case of Bottega, it was important. For example, when we did the leather denim, it's stitched by machine, but then the skins are selected by hand. There was a lot of question about what kind of leather can we use to mimic denim. Is it a Napa? Is it Nubuck? We all sit at the same table, and then the printing process is a technological process. But at the end of the day, the product is still very artisanal. It's not something we can mass produce at all.
I have to ask you about that because it really was one of the most intriguing things I saw in fashion in the last few years, that Matthieu did an Oxford shirt and a pair of jeans and a few other items that looked like an Oxford shirt and a pair of jeans, kind of felt like an Oxford shirt and a pair of jeans, but they were actually made from leather. And it was the most incredible trompe-l'oeil thing.
Yes.
But at the same time, when it looked like an Oxford shirt and a pair of jeans, quite ordinary, quite banal.
Very banal.
Very banal.
Boring.
But just ordinary, boring. Yeah. The whole idea of making them in leather with only the person wearing them.
Yes.
Knew they were made from leather. Otherwise, you looked, there's a person in a boring Oxford shirt and jeans.
Yes.
What was the impulse? What was the creative impulse behind that?
I was starting at Bottega Veneta, and then I watched the movie Closer. And then the last scene, you have Natalie Portman who walks in the street, and she's wearing this denim and a tank top. So it's actually quite a boring outfit. But at the same time, it's very universal. And she has a confidence, and I thought, wow, she looks sublime. Everyone looks at her, women included. She's strong. And then I was very interested by this idea of boring clothes for every day. But, every fashion company produces denim. And I was wondering, how can we, with the craft we have at Bottega, how can we push the making so it really becomes something precious, luxurious, but we don't change the look? Because obviously what I like about denim is also what it means socially, in our environment. And then there was something that I kind of like, because obviously it looked like cotton, but when you touch it, or you're getting touched, which is quite perverse as well, which is quite nice.
Can I touch you?
It's cotton. Yeah. Yes, exactly. But you can touch me later.
And maybe I already have.
The whole idea that we can make something for the everyday, where only the person that wears it knows that it's wearing something very, very special, not just consider the image of a product, but also the way it feels. This I thought was interesting.
Because that is actually the principle of alchemy.
Yes.
Is the transformation of the self.
Exactly.
The alchemist, the transformation of the alchemist, that was actually what the alchemist's aim was. So that particular Oxford shirt and jeans look is about transformation.
Yes.
It's a weird kind of Frankenstein moment.
Yes. Yes, it's
perverse.
Yes, as well. But the power of fashion, I think, is that you can become whatever you want to be. For example, I used to have boots when I was a kid, and I was always turning them down, like Puss in Boots, And then suddenly, in my mind, I was really becoming this. I was transforming myself into this kind of a fictional character. If I would put a little I was becoming Tom Sawyer. And with the clothes we develop, I hope that when people wear a piece that they appreciate, they can somehow become another person or what they want to be, like try to evolve into another character.
Because lately, from that beginning at Bottega, where you did this trompe-l'oeil, which was the transformation of banality, there's a real extravagance now in the clothes.
Yes.
There's a real complexity, and you're telling a global story. You'll pick, like at Margiela, you used to choose from different centuries, almost different eras, make these hybrid things. You're traveling the world now. It's like craft is universal.
Yes. There is this question of cultural appropriation, which is a very relevant question, and I think it demands an answer, you know. And we were talking about it with the team, and I was like, how we can borrow, how we can represent something that feels universal without tapping directly into something that would be produced in, you know, with the cultural knowledge in Mexico or in, I don't know, Jakarta. Places from around the world. And then I thought maybe it was interesting to attack the problem differently and try to make something that feels universal. So what we did is that we looked at several countries, they call it costume, I don't like the word costume, but like traditional costume, or Brittany, Russia, South America, Southeast Asia, and basically what we did is that we tried to blend those information to somehow create a kind of new culture. But I still wanted to represent the idea of something that feels universal, but also from other parts of the world. It's something that now we are exploring, and that I want to, of course, continue to exploring.
You're making this under the umbrella of luxury. So is this a way of making luxury relevant? You know, when you're quoting from so many other things, humble and quite extravagant.
Yes.
Is this consciously a way to make the idea of a brand like Bottega more relevant to more people?
I don't know. I found Bottega relevant in any case. I'm not talking about what I do there. I talk not even as a brand, but maybe as a house. The way the products are made, the culture of the company when it comes to artisan, when it comes to, it's a Bottega. So the fact that the masters, we are making a school now where the masters are also going to pass their knowledge to younger generation. Of course, I want, when I started at Bottega, I said also to the team, I think maybe we can root it back in Italy first. So we did an Italian trilogy. But what's interesting about Bottega is that it's also a company that comes from Venice, which is a carrefour of influence from north to west, east to south. And then comes the global discussion. So now we are a global brand and we need to talk to the world. So our customers are in Korea, they are in US, everywhere in the world. And I think there is fundamentally, I want them also to find something that could look like them, where they also recognize themselves in a story that is not just Italian. So I think it's interesting to have this. Sometimes people will say it's too much information. I think sometimes too much is not enough. I think we have to push those limits and those boundaries.
I also love the idea that working with a team so closely that you challenge them to make impossible things.
Yes.
And I think that's another thing I would take away from the alchemy. You as an alchemist is you're also this master of the impossible. And that seems to be a very conscious thing for you.
Yes. It's... it's very easy to make an embroidered dress. What's not easy is to integrate the technique within the material itself. So, for example, I'm not adding a paillette on a silk dress. I'm trying to have the paillette immediately already made in the fabric. And there is nothing I love more than asking something to the team And here, it's not possible. If I hear it's not possible, then it's going to be a great adventure. And then I'm going to push more.
Thank you very much, Matthieu. I can't wait to see. This is like a book. Every collection is a chapter.
Yes.
And you're writing a really ravishing book there.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, there's your cuddle. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. I love when people say it's impossible, and then you push, and then you create something you never knew you could create. So thank you, Matthieu. That was wonderful. Of course, we've talked about, when it comes to sustainability, a lot of the conversations and decisions and movement is controlled or made in the West. And when we talk about creativity, we often think about creativity the same way. And what's really exciting about this next talk is we're exploring creativity from beyond our normal pastures with our kind of Western gaze. It was in October that Lagos Fashion Week's Omoyemi Akerele alerted me to a new report by UNESCO on Africa's fashion sector. In a nutshell, she said to me, the report underscores the dynamism of African fashion and its ecosystem and argues that it actually can be a key to driving sustainable development through the socioeconomic empowerment of African youth. And this next statistic here is really staggering. By 2050, more than a third of the world's young people will be living in Africa. Just let that register for a minute. There is so much potential in the youth in Africa. This will further the growth of an ecosystem. It offers many opportunities from a consumer perspective. And this email from Omoyemi jived with an interactive article I read a few days later in the New York Times. The main quote said, "As the world grays, Africa blooms with youth. You can hear it in the music the world listens to. You can see it in movies and fashion and politics." So building on these two insights, I asked Omoyemi to invite two people who represent the African fashion youthquake to join us here at Voices 2023. So alongside Omoyemi, we have Zaccheaus, a Nigerian fashion entrepreneur and the creative force behind Street Souk, West Africa's annual streetwear convention held each year in Lagos. They'll be joined by Michelle Adepoju, the British-Nigerian designer and creative director behind the fashion brand Kilentar, which works with artisans to bridge traditional African designs with contemporary fashion. Please give them a warm Voices welcome.
So, I'm thinking of a headline in 2020, right, that pretty much stated lazy Nigerian youth. And, there was this uproar because people were like, wow, what is going on? Why are there presumptions or assumptions about young people and what they're doing? And that's why this conversation is really important to me, because since Street Souk started in 2018, we've just sort of seen this whole galvanization when it comes to urban contemporary streetwear and what the young people are doing. At Lagos Fashion Week, we champion, and support youth either through our Green Access Initiative or Young Designer of the Year or Fashion Focus. But Ireti, it would really be great to listen to you speak to tell us, in 2018, what you had in mind when you started Street Souk. And just talk us through that and how, with that platform, you've been able to create like a whole movement that speaks to the future of what, of this Africa's fashion youthquake that Imran just talked about.
So I started Street Souk 5 years ago because I realized that, there were like a couple individual streetwear brands in Nigeria, but there wasn't any real infrastructure or any real community behind it. And I was like, what can I do to champion the streetwear community because I've always been a streetwear enthusiast, but I knew my calling was bigger than having just a streetwear brand. So I decided to, put a call out on my Instagram and Twitter saying, if you have a streetwear brand in Lagos, reach out to me. And I just got so many messages from that. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, there's definitely something here. And then my mom was already running a fashion souk in Nigeria. So she had the blueprint of how it works. So I was like, okay, I think there's a way I can make this happen. I just have to make it cool and, just target it to my audience. So that's exactly what I did. So Street Souk was birthed in 2018. And in the beginning, there were only about 40 streetwear brands. And this year we have over 600 applications and 150 brands. And, in the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of this was going to become this like global streetwear community that's going to be in, having pop-ups in LA and like in Paris and London and different places across the world. But I just knew that there were so many young and hungry people in Nigeria, and there was just so much there was just so much passion for the streetwear community, and young people just really wanted to show that we're doing something. We're not young and we're not lazy, and we're hustlers. So, we just started going with that. And then we bridging the gap between the African streetwear community and the global streetwear community was what Street Souk has then done for the streetwear community.
Yeah. I mean, that's really fantastic. What's super inspiring for me is that, it sort of speaks to the zeitgeist of the moment when you think about culture and the role that culture plays today. When you're talking about how do we ensure that we preserve, not just craftsmanship, but in, the very essence of what makes Africans African. If you're thinking about music, and that whole cultural renaissance. And can you speak a little bit to the role that Street Souk plays when it comes to that collaboration or cross-collaboration between music, fashion, art, and how that, comes together beautifully? I remember 2017 or 2016, we did, I think, the first collaboration between fashion and music, bringing Orange Culture and Davido together at Selfridges. But since then, there's just been so much that's, that's happening. And I see that, you've done quite a bit when it comes to championing that cause and bringing everything together with young people today.
Because I feel like with young people in Nigeria, music is everything. So, of course, with fashion, music is going to follow, very closely. And in the beginning, like all the artists and stuff were trying to wear like all the big brands from across the world. And then over the years, that's like another main thing with Street Souk. Like we've seen that brands that were essentially birthed with, the beginning of Street Souk, the biggest artists across Nigeria right now, from Ashake to Davido to Wizkid, they would rather wear Nigerian brands and like promote the young people than wear like the super expensive LVs or everything else. And, with the trajectory music is taking right now, with artists like Rema selling out the O2 with 1 billion streams and stuff, fashion and streetwear especially, because that's what young people, that's what we love, that's what we're into. I believe it's going to take the same path. And with Street Souk, we have this community of young people that, like I said, like music, like fashion, like art. So it's a melting point of everything. We have some DJs you might have never heard of, but at the end of the event, you're like, oh, wow, I need to book this DJ for an event. An artist you might have never heard of is just going to go on the mic and start rapping. So it just created that culture for people to feel like, okay, I believe I can do something, so I'm going to be here and do it. Excuse me.
Talking about community, I mean, at Star House Files Lagos Fashion Week, we believe community is always the starting point of the creative process. I was particularly drawn to your work, Michelle, because of the role that you play when it comes to that cross-cultural exchange that's so important and vital and oftentimes missing when people look at collections. Can you tell us a little bit about Kilenta and, the role community plays in the work that you do?
Yeah, so my brand, Kilenta, I actually started I was heavily inspired by my travels across West Africa. So after I left my corporate role, I started working as a private jet flight attendant. And to me, as a young girl, that was like my dream role. And I was able to travel across West Africa. So upon my travels, I went to places like Burkina Faso, Togo, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire. And I came to the realization that there's so much untapped potential in these places. And during the times where air hostesses are supposed to be on standby, I would sneak out and go to the markets and look at the artwork that was there and look at the textiles. And then I wanted to find out, okay, how is this made? So what I did was I went back to Nigeria in 2019, and then I started my brand, started building on my brand. And then what we do is we take people on a journey through West Africa through our clothes, and we are constantly showcasing the artisanal excellence and promoting it on a global scale. And for me, so far, we work with artisans in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Togo, and we're able to highlight the high quality craftsmanship and letting people know that made in Africa, made in Nigeria is luxury fashion. And we're showcasing this through letting them know, showing them the hand beading work, the hand dyeing work, and then recreating it into pieces that are like corsets, ruffled skirts. And these are styles that aren't the typical styles that back in the days people would make with ashoke and adire. So those things have been very important for me, and also highlighting that. And then we have our customers who are mainly in the US and in the UK, Africans in diaspora, that really appreciate the hand-woven work and the quality that's coming out from what we're doing. And this is making them more confident buying in made in Nigeria, made in Africa.
And I guess it really is also very youthful, because
Yes.
I mean, this season you were picked up by Model Operandi straight off Lagos Fashion Week, and it's been interesting to see how your community is responding to that. So, do you think the majority of the people who buy and wear Kilenta are like young people, or do you think it's a brand that speaks to a demographic that's wider than that?
I do feel like it started off with a lot of young people. There was a big buzz with how we're creating our garments, and now it's broader. And we want to obviously reach more of a larger demographic of people as well, and show them that these are the things that we're doing here. This is how we're promoting artisanal excellence through the hand weaving, hand dyeing. So right now, I feel like, especially with being on Moda Operandi, that's gotten us a lot of traction. Our recent London Fashion Week video as well that we did, I went to 5 different states in Nigeria and really highlighted like the beautiful landscape that's in Nigeria. And these are places that we went to the north and the southwest region. These are places that Nigerians living in Lagos might not necessarily visit. So by highlighting this beautiful landscape, we were able to gain, people started saying, where exactly is this? How do I get access to this? I've never seen this part of Nigeria before. So we're promoting that tourist attraction as well. And yeah.
Okay. I know it's December soon, Ireti, and that's countdown to Street Souk. So what should we expect? How many brands are you going to have? Can you just give us like a little sneak peek into what to expect, what sort of performances and all of that?
So this year, I'm on my first tour with Street Souk, and we're doing a 7-city stop. I've done 2 so far. We were invited by Complex Con about 2 weeks ago to do LA, and I did London about last month. And we're doing Seoul DXB in Dubai next week. And then for the first time, I think this is the first time I'm announcing this, we're doing Abuja on the 15th, and then Lagos on the 17th, which is our big event. We have about 150 brands right now, and I'm very excited. All African. Oh. So I've seen Abidjan, South Africa, Ghana, like just different countries around. And to me, this is the real vision of Street Souk, connecting African brands, and exporting them to the rest of the world, because now we're getting a lot of traction from, the international market, and I'm able to showcase that, it's not only Nigeria or Lagos that things are happening, like the whole of Africa, the reports say there's so many young people doing so much exciting stuff. And we have so many new brands this year. We're changing how we do things in terms of, we've stuck to the same floor plan for the last couple of years, but this year I'm taking a risk. I'm like, why not? Let me try something else, include more brands, try and get as many people who don't know about the brand, who don't know about Street Souk, to now know about it. And I'm really excited because the tour has really helped me, know how to process better things for Lagos, because I started street souk when I was 18, so I really was just winging everything. My mom gave me the blueprint, but in all honesty, like it was very much like, okay, I'm gonna try this, let's see how it goes. But now it's kind of like, okay, there's a structure to how to do this, and if you want it to look like this, because obviously Complex Con is like the mecca of streetwear, so being able to be involved in the process and see how it is and everything, it's like, this is the goal for me is bigger than this, and I know that, okay, this is cool, but we're trying to take that to the next level.
That's awesome. And as we try to bring this to a close, so I'm just going to, kind of like ask both of you, so 5 years from now, what do you think, based on the statistics that Imran's just shared, what do you think in terms of Kilenta, but beyond that, in terms of the creative economy in Africa in general, what would you like to leave everyone with, pretty much?
Yeah, I definitely feel like we can start looking into mentorships for African brands. And there's one thing about scaling your business, but then once you've scaled it or once it's reached that international market on a global scale, how do we sustain this? What are the challenges that will be faced and how do we deal with that? As well as also collaborating. So we've seen collaborations with artists, Nigerian artists, with Afro beats. So how can we collaborate with African brands who are also using sustainable fabrics with global luxury brands as well?
And you?
Yes, I think pretty much along the same lines of allyship, collaboration, because collaboration has been a big part of street souk. Like my first ever collaboration in 2020 was with Off-White, and I saw how that, resonated with the rest of the world. Like, oh wow, okay, so there's some cool stuff happening in Africa. Let me see what's going on. So definitely by collaborating with more brands across the world, and just letting the world know that, okay, that there's really something going on here. Like, let's actually tap in properly. Like, BOF, I want to see you in Lagos in December. Like, let's see you at Street Souk and all the other fashion events and see what's happening.
Yeah. So thank you so much. You heard that. Nigeria is home to about 214 million people. And, and that's a significant fraction of Africa's 1.4 billion people. So if you do the math and think that, half of the population is under the age of 20, that's like a huge untapped market. But it's not just in terms of, the market, it's the people. It's what unifies us, it's what brings us together. It's shared purpose, shared passion, a shared vision for the future that, with our creative economy, we can do so much more. We can empower people socioeconomically. We can drive change in a way that really matters, that touches the heart and soul of the continent. And that's its people, our young people. They're the future. And we invite you, whatever you're doing, take a deeper dive, get to know a little bit more. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, the gauntlet has been laid. December, Lagos. We're going to take a little shift now. I want to take you back to the summer. Just close your eyes. And do you remember Barbie Mania? It swept the globe. To date, for those of you who haven't kept track, it's the top grossing movie of 2023, having done more than $1.5 billion at the global box office and making Greta Gerwig the first solo female director with a $1 billion movie. The Barbie movie was a masterclass in brand marketing, taking a name that had lost cultural relevance and bringing it back firmly into the zeitgeist. One key architect of that strategy was Richard Dickson, who was Chief Operating Officer and President of Mattel for the last 10 years. And in a surprise announcement last July, Gap Inc. announced that Richard would become its new CEO. At a time when brand marketing is back in focus, Richard is now tasked with revitalizing Gap and its sister brands, Old Navy, Banana Republic, and Athleta. Investors are placing bets on Richard Dickson to turn things around. In the last month, the Gap stock price was up more than 40%, while the broader apparel sector was up only 2%. But this will be no easy task. And now I have a little story to tell. The Gap is a fashion company very close to my heart. Back when I was a student at McGill University in Montreal, I used to work at this Gap store on St. Catherine Street. It was my crash course in fashion retail and understanding how retail is the coalface. It's where you connect fashion with the customer. At the time, the Gap was best in class. Working at the Gap for me was like a badge of honor. I learned so much from working there, and all my friends thought I was cool because I worked there. But like Barbie, Gap has lost its cultural relevance since its heyday in the 1990s. So I'm really excited to have Richard join us today for his first public talk since becoming CEO, to hear how he plans on applying the lessons he learned from Barbie at the iconic American retailer. Please join me in welcoming Richard Dickson to the Voices.
Thank you.
Is that better? Yeah. All right.
It was a lot of pressure.
Well, your role has a lot of pressure,
It's
no?
a lot of pressure, yeah. First of all, this is an extraordinary forum. And thank you so much for inviting me. And it really is fascinating. It's my first, Voices session, but I'm an addict already, and the lessons I'm learning and the inspiration is truly incredible. So thank you so much for creating this and inviting me to speak.
Well, Richard and I had our first interaction over Zoom very shortly after your new...
Days.
Yeah. I was thinking it was a few days in.
It was days.
And he was there on a Zoom screen, and we had this incredible chemistry right from the start because we were sharing stories about the Gap. And we're going to get to those stories in a minute. But now I want to start with Barbie. What an incredible journey. Tell us what was going on at Mattel 10 years ago when you arrived.
Yeah. Little 11.5-inch doll with a lot of story. This was my actually second chapter at Mattel. 10 years ago, I returned to Mattel in late 2014. I had a successful chapter there from 2000 to 2010. And did a lot of things at Mattel, but was most recognized for my work on the Barbie brand. And at that time, also, Barbie was incredibly challenged, and I was credited, although it takes more than a village for that little 11.5-inch doll to work, with turning the brand around at that time. I left, actually came to the fashion industry, and then got the call from some members on the board of Mattel that Barbie was more than challenged. She was in her third year of double-digit decline, was at the lowest volume it had been in over 25 years. And would I consider returning to Mattel? Glutton for punishment, love a good brand challenge, and had the heart for the company. I rejoined Mattel late 2014. And the headline, actually, very different from my headlines joining Gap, but the headline when I joined Mattel, CNN had a headline that said, "Is Barbie dead?" Quite a welcome. And sure enough, it was an extraordinary, challenging time at Mattel, not just with Barbie, but across the company, but in particular Barbie, which had lost its cultural relevance. And the context of that conversation became really one that I called moving from what was a monologue that we ran for the brand into a dialogue. And once you opened up the dialogue with consumers and said, well, why did this iconic brand that was so inspiring for so many years lose its relevance? Like, she didn't change, it's still the same brand, so what happened? And quickly what we found out as we had this conversation with consumers all around the world was she just didn't reflect what was culturally relevant. Looks, aesthetics, values. Moms had turned actually away from loving Barbie to actually feeling put off by Barbie. Her representation in terms of fashion and dream houses and cars and fabulous life became frivolous. Her aesthetics, which was always a question, but our dialogue, our monologue was, well, she's a doll. She's not a real person, so she can't possibly look like a real person. And that was that. But now we were at a place where the business was really challenged, double-digit declines, and we needed to acknowledge what was happening around the world and in relation to this canvas for cultural conversation. And we went on an epic journey with extraordinary talented people to change the course of the brand. And the process itself was really going back to the roots, going back to the purpose. Why did this brand break through? What made it so great to begin with? And the origin story of the brand was it was designed to inspire the limitless potential of girls. So this little canvas was really designed to unlock the imagination of what girls could imagine themselves being. And back in 1959, clearly, that was fairly limited. So this extraordinary doll unlocked this creative imagination play that went on for decades, and now we found ourselves in this very challenging moment. And so we acknowledged it. We introduced body types, short, petite, tall, using the original as a foundational element, but expanded the brand's diversity, inclusivity. We introduced 24 different ethnicities. And step by step by step, we began to have a much more culturally relevant dialogue with consumers and turn the trajectory of the brand equity into something that had more intrinsic value, had true purpose, was a reflection of the world that we live in. Never necessarily changing the idea of the brand, but translating that idea into cultural conversation, which of course culminated this summer in what was an extraordinary piece of art with Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling and an incredible cast of talented, passionate people who wanted to bring this extraordinary story to life and represent the brand in a whole new way.
So as you're speaking there, some of the words you're using about the state of Mattel and Barbie when you arrived there, a lot of those words could be used for what you've now got ahead of you, the challenge ahead of you. I just want to switch the slide here. This is, tell us about this screenshot.
Well, I mean, this was, frankly, across all our brands, a typical image of what, if you went online a few months ago, whether it was Gap or Old Navy, Banana or Athleta, you were arguably bombarded with messaging. Buy one, get one, 50 off, BOGOs, up to 75 off, 40 off, 2x points, sign up for the credit card, whatever it was, but you barely knew what we were actually selling you, the product. And so, to some extent, the clarity of the conversation with consumers just needed an edit. Our product is great product, but it's lost in the messaging. And so why don't we just clean it up, just edit, have precision in terms of our consumer communication. Pricing strategy is such a complicated conversation, and it deserves a lot of thought process to it. But the clarity that we need to have with a consumer and create a dialogue that creates trust. Trust is probably the single biggest attribute any brand can have across any industry, and arguably we've fragmented the trust because you don't know if you're getting the best deal. And this is an indication of what it looked like when I got to Gap just a few months ago.
So that's the discounting. Talk to us about the image.
Well, is the image really something that you recognize? If you didn't know it was Gap, first of all, where does it even say Gap?
And we might have cropped that out. That might be our fault.
But I think you can really argue who is it? Does it have an identity? Our brands, need to have stronger brand positions and brand identities. First and foremost, a creative point of view. We don't have to have everybody like us. We have to have those who like us love us. Those who don't like us maybe move to like, and those who hate us may hate us always. But today, a brand needs to have a very strong point of view from a creative perspective. And I think this is an example of an identity crisis in the context of what you know and I know and what many of you know, particularly the Gap brand, to be.
So that brings me to my next question, which is like, if that's what, like, if someone gives you a call and says, hey, Richard, you know, this is a great job for you. There's multiple CEOs who've tried and failed to turn this thing around. You log onto the website, you see like bombarded with different messaging around pricing. You see like brand identity, that could be any company. Like who knows, who knows which American retailer that could be. Yeah. Why did you take this job?
Yeah, pick me.
Why you?
Pick me. I mean, I'd be crazy not to take this job. Really, it's an American legendary portfolio of brands. These brands are iconic. They're recognized around the world. Gap is a cultural conversation. The Gap brand is a pop culture brand that sells apparel. And this image to me is the most inspiring sort of restart. Gap is about reigniting this iconic pop culture conversation that started in San Francisco on August 22nd, 1969. And by the way, I deliberately made my start date August 22nd in connection with the heritage of this extraordinary company and the simplicity of it. You know, I mean, really, Levi's records and tapes. The font, the typography, the graphics. It's more relevant today than it was back then, and the cultural conversations that took place beyond that are extraordinary, and our portfolio brands are extraordinary. So I think people thought when I left, you're crazy. You've got this blockbuster movie, you got a good gig, great team, all the world of play and fun, and you're going to this, company in a transformation that, to me, was I'd be crazy not to do it. And it's an incredibly exciting new chapter for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited that you took it on because you're clearly passionate about it. The next photos I wanted to show are like this is what was going on at the Gap when I was working in that store in Montreal. Yeah. It was just, does everyone remember that? Yeah. It was incredible.
Incredible.
And then there were things like this. Let's watch this.
Baby, baby, it looks like it's gonna hail. Baby, baby, it looks like it's gonna hail. You better come inside, let me teach you how to jive and wheel. Oh, you gotta jump and jive and then you really gotta jump and jive and then you really gotta jump and jive and then you will.
So when you see Lenny Kravitz and Naomi Campbell, and you see these remember all those dance commercials? Like every time they came out, everyone would be obsessed with. When you see stuff like that, actually, let's go back because I don't want to talk about that yet. But what do you want to take from that heritage? Like in the same way that you went to the original expression of Barbie, why Barbie existed, why does the Gap exist?
Yeah, I think any brand starts with an idea. I mean, we've heard so many great ideas today, and throughout fashion history, all these brands start with an idea, and then those ideas are brought to life with people, and ideas that become brands evolve. And evolution keeps a brand relevant, but purpose makes a brand immortal. And Gap, when you go back to the origin story, the simplicity of it was Levi's tapes and records in this cool little shop in San Francisco. But the original purpose of the Gap, the original name of the Gap, actually was Generation Gap. And Don and Doris Fisher, our founders, created this place where generations could come together and get denim, jeans, in every size and every fit possible. I mean, the origin story. And by the way, have great music and fun. And as part of their foundational story, it was to do more than sell clothes. And Doris, actually, female founder, took a pen and sort of crossed out generation, and it became the Gap. And that's the origin story, but the purpose of it, to me, is the connective tissue that we need to celebrate, hearken back to, and figure out what is that cultural conversation today. I mean, we see so many iconic images and the smiles in the audience when you see that khaki swing commercial, whether you see it for the first time or you're reflecting back on when you see it. Fashion is entertainment, and Gap was entertaining. We engaged consumers with cultural conversations. Lenny Kravitz, Naomi Campbell, they were wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Boring as it may be from a perspective of our previous speaker in the context of conversation, but it's classic. And we created cultural conversations and we celebrated individuals of style and originality. And so when you think about the conversation today, and somebody mentioned before sort of the terminology of bridging the gap. And our origin story was bridging the gap between generations. What a culturally relevant conversation. Today, just think about how many gaps we have to bridge. Just today's conversation alone, sustainability, digital dialogue, race, ethnicity, diversity, inclusiveness. To be able to have a conversation from a brand that was defined around bridging the gap, from a purpose perspective, there could be nothing more inspiring than taking that cue and figuring out how to create that cultural conversation today, using our brands as a platform to actually create a better world.
So first 90 days, you're in the hot seat. It's August 22nd. You and I had that chat a few days later. Like, what did you need to do? Like, what did you need to do right away?
Well, 3 days after I started, I had no idea, by the way, this was going to happen, but 3 days after I started, I had the earnings call, which was sort of your first, public narrative to Wall Street. So that was quite a welcome. And those of you who've been tracking the Gap know that we've been challenged. I mean, it's a very public narrative where we've been really challenged. But what I did find right away is the culture at Gap is one that is a winning culture. They're filled with positivity. They're a culture of legendary leadership. They're a culture with legendary, foundational success. And they want to win. They work hard, they're talented, they're creative. And I feel as though, as their cultural leader, it's really about hearkening a new chapter, reflecting on the legacy, but creating the future and unlocking the vast amount of creativity and cultural conversation that we could have with these brands that have incredible intrinsic value and meaning. So while the first 3 days was an introduction to Wall Street, the next 3 months was really a listening and learning tour and sort of getting into it with the team day to day and running the operations. And ultimately, where we sit today is a recognition that this is a journey. We didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get to where we want to overnight. But we have extraordinary people. We have a culture that is going to be unlocked with extraordinary creativity. We're going to attract, retain, and excite talent to join us on this extraordinary journey. And I am privileged and honored to be the leader at this particular time.
So we saw the previous screenshot of many messages. This is a more recent, I think, Black Friday campaign. Still a very prominent discount-led or promotion-led message. What are you trying to achieve here?
I think what you start to see is just a bit more clarity. Again, we're sort of dialing because we are a promotional brand and we do love the value that we represent with the quality and the style, and we don't want to fear or move away from that, but we do need a stronger point of view with more clarity and more precision. And I think this starts to guide our way into that next narrative. And so as you watch our brands evolve with more distinction and more of a creative voice, by the way, even within our own portfolio, the difference between Gap and Old Navy, Banana Republic, these are incredible brands, but need to have differentiation amongst each other. Copy, font, typography, every detail of a brand needs to be communicated with precision to have a strong point of view. And that's ultimately the journey that we're on. And I think what you're going to start to see is the evolution of that journey unfold in every one of our brands, in our stores, online, and in our culture.
There's one video that we wanted to show, which is kind of a new piece of creative that when I watched it reminded me a little bit of khakis, but for today, let's have a look at that video.
Being fabulous is all about having good genetics. Let's face it, Only those with a healthy balance of emotional distress and a dose of genius can pull it off, or put it on. That's right, it's all in the genes, baby. The genes, the genes, the genes. So don't knock it until you've tried it, every single pair.
The genes, the genes. I mean, you're going right back to the original.
Yeah, I think this is a great, another great hint and test example in real time of going back to our origin story, but translating that origin story in a relevant conversation today. It's a hint of where we're going. The reaction was fantastic. And as you all know, when you do one thing and then another thing, it builds momentum and cultural momentum, and recognizing that we need to take swings. We need to take risks. We need to encourage our community to fail fast. And I think this is a great example of the creativity being unlocked and going back to the origin story of denim and celebrating it in a whole new, relevant way.
Okay, so you arrived at Mattel, 10 years later, Barbie movie phenomenon. Barbie is culturally relevant. Barbie was on everyone's lips this summer. 10 years from now, 10 years from this moment, after 10 years as CEO, I know you're a vision person. What's in the vision?
It's a little early to share that and articulate it in the context of the precision that I would want to have when asked that question. But what I can tell you is from a personal perspective, I'm inspired by brands that have legacy, that have culture, that have impact, that can, in fact, move the conversation from a cultural perspective in ways that are positive. And I truly believe that our brands represent extraordinary potential in their purpose. I believe that our brands and the recognition that we have around the world allows us to have a platform that can move cultural conversations. And I think when you really think about the origin story of our company as Gap, and the idea of what Gap is, which is space, bridging the gap between cultural differences, opinions. Today, more than ever, we have to have courageous conversations about our differences. And what better definition of a purpose than bridging the gap with our brands as a statement, and how we can leverage that idea into a much bigger personification. Of course, we sell clothes, but we do more than sell clothes. We arguably bridge the gap to create a better world.
Well, Richard, I'm extremely grateful that you've given this first talk here at Voices, and I think maybe why it's resonating with you is because that's what we try to do here too, is we're bridging gaps. So I hope it's not just your first Voices.
Thank you.
And your only Voices. I hope you'll come back with us in the future. Thank you for taking time to chat with us today. So we've arrived at our last talk of the morning. It's been quite a morning, but I wanted to conclude today's session with something a little bit more reflective. This industry, the one we all love and work in, is notoriously tough. Beneath the gloss and the glamour, that veneer that attracts many of us to it, the designers, the executives, the workers, we all work nonstop to keep up with this relentless cycle, as well as all of the globalization and technological change that we've been exploring over the last few days. But success shouldn't come at the expense of well-being. And if you do things right, building a resilient, supportive company culture can go hand in hand with high performance, which is essential for success. Owen Eastwood helps build winning teams. He is an author and performance coach to football clubs, including Manchester City, Chelsea, and England's national squad, but also the Royal Ballet. His work taps into his Maori heritage and concepts like waka papa, which encapsulates the indigenous community's ancient code of togetherness. I first learned of Owen's work from Tim Brown, the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Allbirds. He joined me for a really good episode of the BOF podcast earlier this year. And after we finished recording, he shared with me how he has coped with his ups and downs of Allbirds. And for anyone following Allbirds, companies had a lot of ups and downs. He has doubled down on his leadership lessons from his years working as a professional footballer, working closely with Owen as his performance coach. And they're here today to conclude the fashion system on how companies can unpack high performance while maintaining a supportive culture, something that every fashion company needs. Please give Tim and Owen a warm welcome.
I'm so excited and honoured to be on the stage with you. To set the scene, here is what I see. An increasing sense of anxiety in a complicated world, global complex, sustainability, the environment, increasing disconnection within organisations and the communities that we're a part of, and against a backdrop of a transformational, technologically driven shift in the way that we're working and creating and collaborating. And I don't think it's ever been clearer, at least to me, that cultivating a sense of belonging and connection for our people in the organisations that we're a part of is important, and possibly less clear as to exactly how we do that. And this equally is happening at a time in the age of the Chief Culture Officer, no disrespect, it's a fantastic advancement, with New York Times bestsellers defining the code of culture, and yet here you come along with no traditional training or background in the space, a reformed lawyer who has come into work with the best teams and organisations in the world and take the England football team, shift their fortunes, not just on the field, but in the way that they carry themselves, for anyone who's watched the post-match interview with Gareth Southgate's team. What is your story? What has been your pathway into this conversation?
Well, I think partly because I'm not qualified to do the work, I have to simplify everything for myself first of all, but I think leaders find that quite attractive when you're able to simplify it. I think one of the great unsaid things about a high-performing environment is that, and I'm actually including us here together today, is that when everybody walks in that door, they come with a dignity. And when we want to create a high-performing environment, we make an undertaking to each other that we will do nothing to diminish the dignity of every person. And when we all leave this experience or whatever it is together, our dignity will be enhanced. And for me, therefore, you need to understand the story of the people you work with. So for me, I can only really explain my approach to this by telling you a little bit about my story, because otherwise my work or my creativity doesn't make any sense. And really, my whole philosophy of coaching came from, the fact when I was 5, my father passed away very suddenly. And that left my mother, who was 39, with a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old me, and my sister, who was 3. And my father was an only child, and he was half English and half Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And when I grew up as a teenager, I felt quite lost and like there's a big hole there, not just my father, but something. I felt like I should be part English and part Maori, but I didn't feel those things. So when I was 12 years old, I wrote a letter to my Maori tribe, and I just asked them, I said, my father was Harry Eastwood, my grandmother Rose Eastwood. Do you know who I am? And they wrote a very beautiful letter back to me, which said, we know who you are and you belong here. But what they really did significantly, and this reverberates through a lot of the talks today, is that they explained this very, very ancient idea called whakapapa. And what they said to me is that you belong with us, but you need to understand your place in the world. And they said, whatever community you're part of, from a family to a team to a nation to Gap, whatever community you belong to, you are one person in a line of people. And that line started with our origin story. And all the people that have followed the origin story have their arms locked together. But it goes beyond you to the end of time. And the metaphor they used to me as a 12-year-old, which was very powerful, was that the sun first shone on our origin story, and it just slowly moves down this line of people. And it reveals each of us in turn. So if we're working for a team now, if we're leading GAP now, that recent example, what's happened is that the sun has moved on to us. And that means that you write the next chapter of the story. And what they taught me was that you have to accept when the sun's shining on you, you're a guardian for what the things that came before you. But that's not a fairy tale. There will be certain things which need mending or maybe left behind, and you have to be brave and make calls like that. And then you have to meet the moment with the sun shining on you and write that next chapter of the story, and you have full empowerment to do that. And then finally, every single thing you do has to sow the conditions for those who follow you to be successful. So that was a very beautiful, simple spiritual idea that was given to me as a 12-year-old, and that's completely shaped how I approach building high-performing teams.
So you come into these elite organisations, in some cases take the England football team with hundreds of years of history. Talk to me about your process. And I think one of the things that I've learned so much from you is I think as leaders we use a word like culture all the time. And we say that we care about people, and we know that that's true, but what exactly does it mean? And how do we actually weave that into the day-to-day approach with which we lead the organisation? Tell me about what you do when you come into these organisations, and maybe the story of us is the starting point for that.
Well, when I first became a performance coach, I was doing something with Manchester City, and they had a private meeting with a few selected people to come in and talk about culture. And what I learned in that meeting should have been taught to everybody when we go to school. They shared an insight that 70% of human behaviour is determined by whatever environment you are in at that moment. Why are we not taught that at school? Why do we not understand that? And so therefore we are incredibly malleable and profoundly affected by whatever environment we're in. When I came in here this morning, actually, although I'd not met the crew, the first three people I met, I said, "Hi, Owen." Smiled at me. That changed my hormonal state. I could have easily came in here and relaxed me and gave me a bit of confidence. I could have easily come in here where it was a very different transactional type of feel, where people are very anxious and stressed and whatever, and I would have picked up on that, and my hormonal state would have had rising cortisol levels. So the very starting point of how we think about culture is, to me, it's not words up here, it is simply what is the physical environment we are in at any moment in time, and what is our hormonal reaction to it. And when I started working with the England football team, there were individuals who were terrified by what they were doing. So, with the Ryder Cup team, people like Rory McIlroy and John Rahm, England football, Harry Kane, we can't just tell them what to do. We first of all have to create a story for them to connect to. This is a story of who we are. This is our purpose. This is where we come from. And this is a chapter of the story that we could write, which will be one of the best experiences of our life, and will be ultimately our legacy before we pass the shirt on. And I've not met an athlete who doesn't love that. And I think that's something that sometimes gets a bit neglected. We do a lot of external marketing. We're brilliant at telling the whole world what our story is, but maybe actually our authentic internal story is undersold. So that's where we start. We want them to be connected to something bigger than themselves, and they want to go there. But if we don't do it, they will default to being pretty selfish and individualistic.
One of the big takeaways I've had from our conversations and reflections, and at Allbirds we started out strong. With 6 people, we defined an environmental mission, deep connection to our purpose. As Richard said, purpose is immortal. And yet, as we grew from 6 to 1,000 people over, give or take, 6 or 7 years, I don't want to say we stopped caring, but I think we put that particular piece of our storytelling on the shelf. And one of the big things that I've taken from you is that as a creative person, as a storyteller, are we doing enough within our organisations to tell stories internally in the same way that we're telling them outside of the organisation? We spent a lot of time on the fall runway show, and we spent a lot of time on the holiday campaign. But this need to constantly refresh the internal storytelling of our story of us and of our purpose was something that felt so obvious to me, and yet something that at Allbirds we certainly stopped doing through a number of years. Tell me about, practically speaking, the role of content and creativity to bring that story to life.
Well, you're my friend, Tim, and I've kicked you in the butt a few times about this because we met before Allbirds really was a thing. And we would sit down like this in a pub in London and you would tell me your dream and the story, and you sold me straight away. It was pure. It sounded cool as well. Being connected to you made me feel a bit like a better person and your products. So that story was powerful. I'm not from the fashion industry, but I wanted to be part of what you were doing. And then we project forward, I don't know, 8 years down the line, you got 1,000 people, and I've kicked you in the butt, haven't I? I've said that you've bureaucratized your culture. You know, it used to be you could just tell me right now and tell all of us the soulfulness of what you're about and what you want to do and what's important. And literally yesterday I read a document of 38 pages from, you know, your head of HR. And I didn't actually understand exactly what it said. So, but this is actually a pattern, is that these startups, you know, there's a good analogy of like teenagers. Like, we've got so much energy, we don't want to sleep, we want to take risks, it's so unbelievable, it's so powerful, you just want to be part of it. But then we start to break even and make a profit. And then we start to feel like we've got to grow up a little bit, don't we? We've got to be mature. We better be sensible and have some business processes, and we better get that expense, you know, process sorted out. And we better have an HR process, and we better have appraisals, and we better do this, we better do that. All of a sudden, the soulfulness has gone out of it. Mm-hmm. It's a common pattern. There's research on it. It shows that 90% of those startups die for that reason. So, you know, I plead with you and anyone else, you've got a beautiful story, my friend, and you've got to keep it alive. So when not only when people come into the building on their first day, you've got to create rituals and traditions where it's reiterated. Because actually it's not just for the benefit of new joiners, it's for the benefit of us who've been here a long time. We want to hear the story again. We literally have this fire pit we want to feel the warmth of. And that's what will energise us. So, as you've seen, we create some really beautiful films for some of our teams just about who the hell we are, why we're different, and what makes us special.
Yeah. I'm very lucky to have you as a friend. There's just the power of creating storytelling for our people was so simple, and how on a list of 100 things to do in the first 90 days, how often does that fall down the list? And it's so simple and so beautiful. When does this not work? When's the organisation you walk into, and the Royal Ballet School, and they're like, fantastic, great work with England, but this is a very different thing? When does this not work?
Well, hopefully I haven't got too many media here, but a couple of things. One, the Royal Ballet School, something I really enjoyed about that project was they are the #1 ballet school in the world. They, you know, the rankings, and it's all great. Every person who's graduated there has become a professional dancer since the 1950s. Amazing. It's amazing. But a few years ago, somebody did some research that showed that if you went through the Royal Ballet School or a similar type of school, you're 4 times more likely to have anxiety and depression as an adult than the normal population. So that's an example where you're part of a very beautiful tradition, but when the sun comes on you, you have to ask yourself a question. Do we want to just continue as we are, or does it incumbent upon us to change our trajectory? And they decided that we want to be the #1 ranked school and we want everyone to graduate into a professional job. But that is not success if we know that people come through this experience and are damaged. So they then committed incredibly to a wellbeing team there, which is phenomenal, world class now. And their success indicators include people having a better chance than the normal population to have a great life after they leave, rather than being damaged. So that's a good example to me of leadership. Another example, I worked with the British Olympic team before the last Olympics in Tokyo. And what was very interesting was that the Olympians felt like it's a bit about me, me, me. Fair enough too, you're an Olympian, that's fine. But actually the surveys show that Team GB is the most loved team in this country. Also the most diverse team. But I remember being in a forum, not dissimilar to this, and an athlete putting their hand up and asking one of the leaders, who was the first female Team GB Olympian? Because we're talking about our diversity and we're celebrated for it, so who was that? And the leaders literally couldn't answer. And then someone else put their hand up and said, what about our first black Olympian in Team GB? Who was that? And then with a bit of confidence, they said, well, that was Jack London in 1928, because the BBC had written an article. That's not true. It was Harry Edward in 1920. And I sat there and I thought, I'm not comfortable with this at all. You have got an incredible story. Your people want to be part of something special. You don't even know what the hell it is. In fact, you're giving erroneous information about what it is. So what was interesting, we created a beautiful film and beautiful animation in the Olympic Village. It had a representation of all of our Olympians from 1896. And the leaders thought, maybe this is a waste of money and time. Why are we doing this? But actually, during the Olympics, the Olympians themselves just took selfies the whole time with these images of those ancestors who they in particular could relate to. Maybe something that shared their own identity story. I think it opened their eyes. So, I mean, that's quite an obvious way of where that when you do that story and you invest in it, people want to be part of it and want to belong to it.
So much, I mean, certainly in my reflections in the context of All Birds, a story that's come from nothing to something in a small space of time. As we've got a little bit off track, so many of the answers lie in going back to the beginning, to why we started it and what mattered. And there's a simplicity to that you've drawn out of me, which I greatly appreciate. For everyone sitting in the audience today, and they've got competing incentives around margin and earnings calls and Wall Street and just the humdrum of daily life, but they sit here and they say, a sense of belonging is what I want to cultivate. What should they hold in their heads kind of coming out of this conversation?
Well, I would say that I'm in the energy business. I'm in the business of human energy. So if we go back to that 70% of human behaviour is determined by your environment, then we want to create an energetic environment. And this might not sound corny, but it's completely true, is what we actually do in these environments is we start with how can we build a healthy environment? Healthy. We'll do all the fancy performance refinement later. Let's build what's healthy? So it's when you're motivated by a sense of purpose. Okay, so you got your dopamine surging, it's pretty good. You feel connected to the people around you and you can trust them and you see the dignity in them and you know their story. And this is ritualized. That makes us have surge of oxytocin. So rather than being energized by fear of cortisol, we actually motivate and energize people through these more positive hormones of oxytocin and dopamine. So that's where I start with. We are wired to hear the story of us, who we are, and to belong to it. So when we provide that for our people, we energize them, we change their hormonal states. And then, of course, as we've got everyone in that state, then we can really refine on the things we're not clear on and we can get clearer. We can simplify down our game plan from 99 data points to 3. We can do all those beautiful pieces of performance, which I love, but we do it after we've built a healthy environment. Why do we try and build a healthy environment in our families instinctively and then try and help them achieve their full potential and then often take the reverse approach when we're working together? I don't get that.
I'm very fortunate to have you as a friend that kicks me in the butt regularly, and I'm very appreciative of the chance to share some of Owen's wisdom with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Owen, for acknowledging my team, who I'm sure all of you have already realized are amazing. They know all your names, and they're here to help you. Thanks to everyone watching online. That brings us to the end of our second session, the fashion system at Voices 2023. I'm sure you have reflections on that session, things you've learned, screenshots you've taken, photos you've taken. Share all of that feedback with us. It is our fuel using the hashtag BOF Voices. To all of our members watching online, we'll see you back here at 3 p.m. London time for our session on technology and innovation. It is a wildly interesting session. We have the LVMH Chief Data Officer, Anka Marola. We have the designer, Kelly Wurstler, as well as the singer and songwriter Ali Sethi, all of whom are going to talk about how AI is transforming the way they work. It's changing business, creativity, and the world we live in. So we'll see you all in a bit. So long for Oxfordshire. Bye-bye.